Hello, hello everyone. I'm still not used to the chat hanging out there. Maybe I should like move my face here. It just feels weird and off center. Hello everyone. We are back as per usual. Got my tea. I've got some stronger stuff this time. Some peach black tea. You could actually see it a little bit in that camera angle. Normally it's hard to see. You can see a little bit. Um, because we're gonna need something a little stronger today. We're finally going over this debate. I have seen this already, so pre-watch. Sorry, not live reacting. But it was very interesting, and so I wanted to go over it. The difficulty is that, well, it's about abortion, and abortion's kind of a tough topic. I'm gonna jawn for a little bit while people file in if they do. Uh, yeah, abortion's a rough one, and in fact, I'm a little uncertain that we can even get to the debate today. The reason being that you know, as I try to do around here, I want to be honest about my positions on everything before we get into it and acknowledge whatever bias I might be going in with. However, abortion is such a complex issue and such a multifaceted issue that it might just take like an hour to go over all of it. I'll try not to. I'll try to keep my thoughts brief, and I'll try not to get into the stuff that won't become relevant here, but like especially if anyone in chat wants to like pop in, I would encourage anyone to pop in with any concerns here because abortion is one subject. One of the things I like about it is that it's a topic that is very accessible to a lot of people. It's something that a lot of people have an intuitive understanding of and an intuitive feeling on, but is very philosophically complex, and it's a good entryway into like, okay, let's do some philosophy right now, let's talk it out. And it can be helpful. It's another instance where like, because the topic is one that is a lot more recent in in far as when people have discussed it, so very thoroughly at the very least, because what adequate means did there exist for abortion prior? There wasn't like really good ways of doing that. It wasn't. It was definitely not allowed. Now that we're discussing it more, it is a lot more recent that you have people writing on it, which means that you don't have what often happens in philosophy, unfortunately, where people will just effectively quote scripture at you. They'll just say like, "Well, Kant said this 400 years ago," and it's like, "Well, I don't remember when Kant was writing. I don't think it was that long ago." But like, okay, sure, but that doesn't help at all, right? We want to understand the reasons behind what makes things true or false, so on, etc. And because we don't have access to stuff like that, like there's stuff you could definitely reference. Those references end up being more contributive than an argument by way of authority, which I really like because now you can introduce like, okay, well this thinker had this to say about it, or this thought experiment has been making the rounds because of some writings, and it allows people to. It's something people they can engage with, but they're not just going to accept outright, which is great. I think that's how philosophy ought to be done. You can listen to what thinkers have said in the past. I think it's good and important to do that, but that shouldn't be taken on its face. You should understand their arguments, their reasons, and have ways and have responses to that. There are parts that are going to make sense and parts that aren't, and should push back on the things that don't make sense. And this is how you do philosophy, right? Well, abortion is great as a subject for that reason because it allows people to do that. And there's a lot of intuition that makes people push back on what people often will hear from philosophers. Now, that is double edged, of course, because people will also simply resort to their intuition. It feels icky, so I don't like it, and it's bad, and often have bad reasons for this. But when engaged with authentically, oh hey Galit, when engaged with authentically, I think it's a great opportunity to like actually do some philosophy in a way that people will be less apprehensive of. People are less likely to be like, well, this question is answered, the topic is settled. We kind of do this with science too, and I think science is slightly more susceptible to this being actually true, though not really. But people will say like, well, we know right? Like science has figured out what the laws of thermodynamics are. There's not going to be like you're not going to like come up with an argument why they're not real. That's not entirely accurate, but like we get that sense. And especially in the United States, education is often done like teaching gospel where you just tell the facts and people accept it. Well, people do that a lot with philosophy as well, and it just doesn't work. It's not philosophy's job is less to answer questions than to ask them. And sometimes really interesting questions are asked in a way where you kind of have to have like, well, at least what is your solution to this? What is your proposal for this? But it's not. These things aren't set in stone. So with all that being said, all that jawing on I did. Uh, Time to be honest, right? So we're getting into a abortion debate. What are my positions on abortion? It's complicated, and I'll try to be succinct here, but it's difficult. Partly because the subject itself has two components that are often intermixed, and that's going to happen a lot in this debate. Though I think I think Vosh does like a pretty good job of recognizing when it happens, even though I forgot to mention this is between Vosh and TikTok person named Tyler Bluntman. Um, I guess we can put this here. Uh, so like people they're like moderately good at noticing when they're shifting between the two aspects I'm about to lay out, but not perfectly so, and of course they keep bleeding into each other. The two aspects I'm talking about are the moral considerations and the political ones. Now, the political considerations are also moral ones, obviously. We should our political decisions should be based on what is good, not like dominance or power or whatever. We shouldn't like it should be with an eye towards morality, but when I say a moral one, maybe I mean more an ethical concern, and I mean big E ethics as far the branch of philosophy. For those who are unaware, there are different branches of philosophy, kind of like there are different branches of science. Ethics is one of them, as opposed to like metaphysics or aesthetics or logic, whatever. And the ethical consideration is the one that a lot of people want to have because it feels the most pressing. It is and it isn't. And the question is it wrong, right? Like I mean in the broad sense, but more specifically like is abortion taking a human life? And there's a lot of questions of like personhood. When does a person become a person? Because it seems pretty clear that there's a continuum there. That at some point it's not a person, clearly, right? Like nobody ever makes the argument that like before nobody ever makes the argument that before conception it is a person, right? The gametes are people, or even before forming as gametes, nobody ever argues that they're people, right? And it seems pretty clear that they're not. But at some point, it's unmistakably a person. It's the exceptionally rare person, if anyone, who will say that at the point of birth, an infant is not a person, right? So somewhere in there, personhood occurs, and I don't just mean life, by the way. I'm using personhood intentionally. Life, well, there are qualifications, and like there's a lot of and because this is where again it gets difficult because like in this discussion, the difference between personhood and life is another deviance point where we get mired in the weeds. It's not going to come up very much, but like life has like qualifications, but these are all philosophical ones. It's kind of it's similar to personhood. The big difference is that there are things that can be alive that don't have the rights of personhood. And by I mean like legal rights of personhood. Again, we're bleeding in like legalism. So we're gonna try to focus for the moment on the ethical stuff, and we'll talk about when life begins. This is an uncertain question. Obviously, there are a lot of people who argue that life begins at conception. To me, that it to me is like someone who tries to look at this stuff really philosophically. I know that's a little fart sniffing as far as an answer goes. This feels like a very arbitrary distinction. I know it doesn't seem like that to a lot of people, and I'll address it as reasonable in a moment. But it's not like why is it that the gametes when separate are not considered life? Well, because then like No, they're combined in some sense. Okay, maybe when it splits, but like, is it able? Like, does life have to be viable outside by itself? Maybe like you could argue it's a parasite, right? Parasites are life, um and of course in the course the idea of parasitism brings to light another pretty relevant detail, which is that just because something is alive does not mean it has the right to that does not mean it is wrong to kill it, right? If a parasite is in your body and it's harming you, it seems reasonable that we can, at the very least, extract it. And if that causes it to die, so be it. Um, but of course, people feel differently about humans. Now, of course, this is where we get to a lot of some of the more interesting arguments that people have tried to levy, where they try to say, okay, let's assume life does begin at conception. Let's assume everything, which I don't necessarily agree that it does, and we'll come. I'll circle back to it. It's going to be a little circuitous how we have to approach things, just because of how much stuff bleeds into each other. Uh, so the next question is, uh, oh yeah, sorry, not the next question. I forgot my train of thought, which was okay, some people try to make the argument like even if it is a life at conception, does that entitle entitle a fetus to like your body basically? Is your bodily autonomy something that you are obligated to give up? And that's going to be the subject of a lot of this debate, so I'm not going to get into too much of the details there. I find these arguments moderately compelling. I feel like they're difficult and they don't they often don't work for a lot of people. There are very good discussions on this. There's the, like very famous example of let's say you're walking along and like for whatever reason you fall unconscious. Maybe you're like maybe it was just a hot day and you pass out. And when you wake up, you find that a group of scientists or a group of doctors was like, okay, here's what's going on. There's an exceptionally talented person. Often the example is, I think, a violin player, but it doesn't really matter. There's an exceptionally talented person who whose internal organs are failing, and for 10 months needs to be, you know, tubed up to somebody for their own survival, and you're the only person on the planet who can provide this to them. So we did that. We hooked you up. Would it be wrong for you to refuse, demand back your bodily autonomy, and effectively allow this person to die? I'm not going to get into the details of that because I know there's a lot more to discuss before we even get to the video. Peachy Keen. Yeah, see, like pretty intuitively, a lot of people are want to say no to that example, and I find that pretty compelling. There are problems with the idea, and I really encourage you to look into them. Not because I think the argument fails, but because it's a really good way of looking at practical philosophy, which philosophy can be very practical, and this is a good entryway for it. So, like, I would look into that example. There are good. I know Philosophy Tube on YouTube has a video about it excuse me, she dramatizes the events. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just going with my gut when you gave me that example. Yeah, a lot of this is really intuitive, and it's okay to start there. Really, really okay to start there. But I'm going to encourage us, especially as we go through, encourage everyone, especially as we go through this debate, to try to go outside of just the intuition. Try to really think through why it feels that way, where you're coming from as to why you feel that way, and like how you can modify or like how you address these ideas. But like moving back to what I was talking about before of like, okay, but do we have to bite that bullet? Does life begin at conception? Well, I'm not so sure. And the flip side of that I've heard is like some people will say, well, at birth. That seems a little weird because like the day before birth, right, feels like a pretty arbitrary line. Is it any less a person? Then I think most people intuitively want to say no. And I would want to say no as well. When birth happens is somewhat arbitrary. Birth can be induced and whatever else. And in fact, as I understand it, if you are, uh, you know, three, sorry, 8 months and 3 weeks pregnant, and you don't want to be pregnant anymore, nobody would give you. Not only would nobody want to give you an abortion, the way they'll make you not pregnant anymore is they'll induce birth. They'll induce labor, and so like, okay, you're not pregnant anymore. Yeah, we've solved the problem. But the reason why I bring that up is because there's also been an idea that people have had that I've definitely heard arguments for, which is that maybe we can draw a line at when it is no longer when the fetus is no longer parasitic is a very like a very like loaded way of putting it. Basically, when it is viable outside of the womb. The thing is, medical technology improves. What is viable outside of the womb now is vastly different than what viable outside of the womb was 100 years ago. Does the point at which a fetus becomes a person change with the improvement of technology? What if we got to the point where a fetus was viable outside of the womb, maybe with like, incubators and such, the day after conception? Would that make personhood begin at conception then? And is it technology that defines that? That doesn't work for me. I feel I find that is very unsatisfactory, but it's a good attempt. I think it's a good try at finding this line. I don't think it exists in a very clear way. I think it's more of like kind of a spectrum. Like a lot of things, nature tends to work on spectrums. There's not clear dividing lines between things so much as like, well, here's the stuff that exists, and as we try to categorize, we see like they more or less fall in these areas. But this is a really difficult one, and one that has pretty serious importance, because remember what we're talking about. If it is the case that life and personhood really does and ought to be considered started at at conception, then abortion really is many, many murders per year, right? Like a lot of these things happen. I don't think they are, and well, that's like part one of my thoughts on the matter. I don't think abortion is murder. Uh, I think that line for where personhood starts is nebulously somewhere between where conception is and towards the end of pregnancy, but I couldn't really tell you where. I feel that the the stage of development matters a lot. A cluster of cells is significantly less a person at the very least than than an actual baby, a birthed baby. Um, but where in that period, I don't really know. I think the laws that I've generally seen about this of like, okay, well, like the third trimester is definitely too late for an abortion. I agree with that for sure. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's first or I'm not really sure about first or second trimester. I'm really uncertain about this. But that leads into the other problem, which is that this is not exclusively an ethical concern. This is also a legal concern. And on a legal basis, there's more to consider than merely does a how did this get misaligned? No, it's still misaligned. Okay, whatever. I'm just not gonna deal with it. There's more to be concerned with than the life of the individual, if it is one that is to be aborted. We often, and that sounds really weird, right? Like how is that possible that like one person's life doesn't really matter? Well, we often have considerations like that. A lot of which I tend to disagree. I tend to disagree with, but we understand that like there are instances where uh, a person can lose their life and have that be at the very least politically acceptable, but also morally acceptable. So the easy one is if you are being attacked with someone who has a weapon of some sort that clearly has lethal intent and lethal capabilities, it is not controversial in the slightest to say you have the right to defend yourself, and that if that requires the use of lethal force to kill your attacker, that is okay. Nobody has a problem with that in concept. Like I'm making it as unambiguous as possible for that reason, which means that we are clearly okay sometimes with people dying. And so the question is it reasonable? This is why the subject of, well, if the pregnancy will kill the mother, is that not abortion as self-defense? I think that's a really good argument, honestly. It's not going to come up here, but I think it's relevant. It's like something to keep in mind. I think stuff like that is pretty important. And so politically it seems clear to me that never can't be the answer. It can't be never. Right? We like people have been going on more recently about how like cases of incest or rape are exceedingly rare, or the fetus or the pregnancy being harmful to potentially harmful to the mother. It doesn't matter how rare it is. The point is, it happens. It needs at a minimum, right? Abortion needs to be it needs to be accessible for people who've had this happen to them. The next thing that comes up though is for like on a political level of like, well, there are ramifications to that being the exclusive consideration that allows or the exclusive the only thing that we allow for, because then you get cases of like, okay, someone comes in and they say it's an instance of incest or rape, or they say some other doctor determined that the pregnancy would be harmful for them. Would it, for the latter example, would it be required that abortionists like conduct their own appraisal, like their own examination of the patient to determine if that's true? And in the former, what the hell do you do to prove that, right? Like, how could you really look into this? Additionally, on top of all of this, something that like is really important to remember is that there are ramifications to these children being born as opposed to being aborted, and it's really unfortunate that so many people are in positions where if this child is born, it's going to be bad for everybody. Maybe they don't have the means to support the kid, and like putting a kid up for adoption is not a solution. The United States has a huge issue with its foster care program, like uh, orphaned children and like children given up for adoption are not exactly, they don't necessarily, they're not signed up for great lives. They can have good lives, and I hope they do, but oftentimes a lot of really a lot of really shitty things happens to them. Um, and further down the line, there are additional impacts. One of the things that I don't want to find it now, but I've seen data suggesting that after Roe v. Wade, I think it was like 18 years later, crime decreased like a huge amount. The idea being perhaps and I think the study was like showed a correlation or like showed a link between the two. I don't remember exactly, so don't hold me to that. The idea being that like a lot of these kids that would have been aborted would have probably grown up in poverty, would have had very difficult lives, and might have needed to commit crimes to live. Poverty is one of the biggest determining factors of criminality, which has problems in itself, right? It shouldn't be the case like that. And this is where we get to my actual stance on the matter, and why I needed to like go on a bit before I could lay out my biases and uh, and be honest about my positions here. Is that I the thing I don't like about abortion is its necessity. Is that it most often happens in cases um, where a person like or like it's just kind of a bad situation. People don't get abortions because like everything is going well most of the time. Now, I wouldn't want to live in a world where like it feels weird. It would feel kind of icky to me if we lived in a world where like people just use that as like another option for birth control. Like they were just like, screw it. I don't want to go on the pill and I don't want to use a condom. I'll just get an abortion. I don't think that happens, but that does feel a little icky to me if it did. Uh, but clearly, but like abortion seems like a symptom of other problems. In a world, for example, where nobody got pregnant that didn't want to, we wouldn't have to have this conversation at all, right? Like for real, like if just like we could wave a magic wand and the only people who get pregnant are people who want to, then there's never going to be an instance where someone has the thought that they need to have an abortion, or at the very least, very rarely. Like, and so this is why there's the the hypocrisy is often brought up of people who are anti-abortion are often anti-contraceptive and sex ed. But like, if you want to reduce the abortions that happen, which I think would be good, I think it would be good because again, I think it's a symptom of other problems. Like, if you want to reduce the number of abortions that happen, a really good way of doing that is reducing the number of unwanted pregnancies. And contraceptives and comprehensive sexual education do a really good job of reducing the number of unwanted pregnancies. And that is where I prefer to approach the issue is prevention of of like preventing the cause rather than dealing with the abortion thing. But given that we can't just do that, given that we can't wave that magic wand and cause the world to have no unwanted pregnancies, it seems pretty clear that abortion needs to be accessible, even if even if you think it's like it's wrong in some sense. And by the way, I don't believe people for a second when they say that they think it's murder, because they don't treat it like it's murder. They like weep for the mothers. If you knew someone who was a murderer, you wouldn't weep for them. You would have very strong moral opposition to their actions and like think they're kind of a bad person. Not like, oh, you poor lost soul. Like that, these people don't really believe that. So that's like my general position on abortion. I hope that's been clear. Sorry, I'm gonna close the door. Give me 1 second. But I guess I'll keep talking to you since I have my headset on. But if you'll notice, at no point did I discuss anything regarding religion. And that was intentional because I wanted to make it clear that like this conversation doesn't need it, and in fact is not helped by religious concerns. There are a couple of reasons for that. They're not going to come up in this debate, but I'm trying to be comprehensive while being succinct. Honestly, being only about 20-25 minutes I've been going on about this I'm proud of myself. I thought I'd be going on for like an hour about this. I really wasn't sure if we'd have time for the video, but we will. Oftentimes, particularly Christians will argue that abortion is condemned by the Bible. I'm not sure where the justification for that comes from. Usually they say that's like their source for saying that life begins at conception. My understanding is that this is not scriptural, but dogmatic. And I mean that in the sense of like churches have asserted this, but it's not. There's no source in the holy text, as it were. These are kind of added on beliefs, and there are a lot of those. As an example, Immaculate Conception in Christian theology is not anywhere in their holy text, but it's believed as doctrine. It's just kind of like an added on belief, something that not all Christians believe, by the way, but at the very least, I think it's Catholic doctrine that is kind of an added on belief. So like I think that's the same with Christians, and they're like life begins at conception, and it's a life, and there's a soul, and yada yada, etc. Now that said, I don't think that changes anything, even if that were true. Like even if you think that the fetus has a soul, which seems a little weird, but like even if you think that, I don't think that really changes any of the philosophical arguments. And of course, there are religious claims on the other side saying that, like for example, Judaism allows for abortion. In fact, there's a portion in the Old Testament. I'm trying to remember the gist of it, but it's more or less like if a man believes his wife is cheating on him, and of course, like in those days, why would he think that? Because she's pregnant, and she's like, well, I couldn't have gotten you pregnant, so like, what's going on there? He can take her to the temple, and she'll be given this mixture that when she drinks it, it will cause. It's funny because the translation is it will cause her leg to fall away, and you're like, what does that mean? I'll skip a lot of the stuff I've learned. I remember, I think it was Bart Ehrman, or maybe it was Richard Carrier talking about this. There was someone, some specialist who would explain this, but basically the idea is, it's the fetus is considered a limb, and it was saying it will fall away and die. Like an abortion will happen. You'll have a miscarriage. This is of course. Oh yeah, I also missed the like political ramifications of completely abolishing abortion, having things like, well, if a miscarriage occurs, or like, how do you know that was that was natural or not? And so you have people like in some states now wanting to like prosecute anyone who has a miscarriage, whether it's their fault or not. Even in like that's pretty terrible. Or like, well, you do have those minority of cases where like someone would be giving birth to an already dead fetus. Why are we making them do that? All these ramifications. But back to the religious thing, like I don't think these religious arguments matter. For the ones where people would use their religious claims to say it should be disallowed, there are lots of things that religions disallow. That doesn't mean they should be politically enforced. Uh, Jews, Jews who keep kosher, which is not all of them, but like by Jewish law, you can't eat pork. Does that mean pork as a food product should be made illegal in the U.S.? Well, no, because this isn't a theocracy, and that is not the basis for our laws. It should be what causes a more most most good in the world in general, but also in smaller collections like our country or our state or whatever else. And as far as allowing things, you can say like that doesn't matter either because there are things that some religions allow that we say shouldn't be allowed, like polygamy or slavery. Just because that exists in the holy text doesn't mean that we should have those as law. So that's why I left a lot of that out until the end. A lot of this isn't going to come up. The reason I wanted to watch this debate in particular is because I think this is a very interesting, an interesting subject that was approached very poorly, and in particular because we've watched a lot of different kinds of debates. I wanted to show one where I think where we see a lot of the problems of debate come up because I think it's very clear to me, and I guess I'll spoil things for you, that Tyler wins this debate. And when I say wins, I don't mean he's right. I mean he argued better. He made his points more clearly. His positions were could be considered convincing to people who came in with a dissenting view. And I don't think Vosh did a very good job arguing his position. He often had really bad arguments, even though I generally agree with Vosh's position on this. As I understand it, he's similarly in a similar boat to me. He might be a little more a little more okay with abortion than I am, but like even still, like we're still on the same page of it needs to be on a political level, it needs to be accessible. So all of that being said, only a half hour. We did it. We did it. We kept the view short, and I could have gone on honestly for like hours about this subject. And if you guys want to chat about it, well, last call for now, but otherwise we'll approach it later. What the hell is this? Oh, right, okay. All right, let's get into it.
Hey, can you hear me?
Hey, what's up?
Oh, and I forgot to mention, completely unrelated, but um, unless I hear back from Dr. Wilson about whether he wants to come on, I don't intend to come back to the vaccine stuff. So we will consider that closed unless Dr. Wilson comes on. So I'm gonna try not to do. I know we had like 3 or 4 streams where that was what I was talking about. We're not doing that anymore. We're done with it. And now unless we come on, unless we talk to someone who really knows what he's talking about on the subject, we're not gonna go into it ourselves anymore.
What's up, buddy?
I'm doing fantastic.
This is
How
also a
about
less
yourself?
structured debate, so don't expect
Well,
the same.
man,
This is more like
man, oh my goodness, the
you know
amount of
people
people
just
that
talking.
have wanted me to debate you, man, is ridiculous.
Yeah, there are a lot of people on TikTok that I've been meaning to I don't know get to.
This debate also goes in a
because
lot
the
of
YouTube,
circles.
I feel like I've done.
So
YouTube, I gotta spread my wings.
if we find that it's becoming too circular, we can stop early. I don't need to go over the whole 2 hours. I don't think there's a lot of circularity in here. I mostly want to show. I think it's about the halfway point where it's like, all right, we got the idea of it.
Like, where people were like, "Oh, you're gonna debate Nick Videos," and back when Nick Videos
Let me
was
know if the
actually,
audio's okay.
like relevant and everybody like liked him on the conservative side.
Oh yeah,
Everyone's
he
like,
pussied
"Oh,
out
you're gonna
massively.
debate Nick Videos."
So it was a beta
Yeah,
move.
I don't know exactly what happened there.
Now, I can tell you because it's kind of funny. So he was all gung ho about debating me. Phenomenal. I love debating, but he was nice to me in person. You know, great. Then he takes his break from politics, doesn't want to debate no more, and then he comes back and he's like a Nazi, but he's too busy to debate me now because of college. But he debates.
Talking about
people.
other stuff,
I think what happened was
I don't
he
remember
kinda
when
had
they
his
get
little
to it.
Groiper awakening. See, there's like 15 years old, and I'm like, yeah, I'm in a.
But it doesn't really matter because if you're talking about bodily autonomy, that you know,
Okay, let's back up.
base your stance on abortion. Understand your position correctly is that you base your stance on abortion based off of the bodily autonomy argument, right?
Yeah, because I mean,
So this is the bodily autonomy argument is kind of a mix of the political and the ethical concerns. Obviously, they're not completely separate. I just distinguish them because understanding where we are in that continuum is really helpful for understanding where the arguments are going wrong. It's basically the idea of like you have the right to bodily autonomy, and if you deem that a fetus is violating that right, like if you know if you are pregnant and don't want to be, you don't want this other agent feeding off of you in a way. Like I'm putting it in very, very loaded terms intentionally. Then, you have a right to expel that from your body, as you would have the right to expel any foreign any foreign life form. Is that the same as the self-defense argument? Not exactly. The self-defense argument is with the idea that like it could be harmful and it is being harmful to you, and I think that is only relevant in a minority of cases. This is closer to whether it is harmful to you or not. It is having an impact on your body, right? Pregnancy is not like nothing, right? There are, people complain, talk about all the time of like the effects of pregnancy, both short and long term, during and afterwards. In addition to like, now you have to like, it's feeding off of you, this kind of stuff. This is closer to like viewing a fetus as a parasite, which isn't necessary for the bodily autonomy argument. You don't even have to, but this is kind of like the idea of the if the doctors hooked you up to the famous violinist because he would die without being hooked up to you. It's closer to that of like my bodily autonomy should allow me to walk away, and and um and that is extremely valuable. And we're going to get to a lot of one thing I think Vosh does do well in this debate is he makes clear the relevance of bodily autonomy as a political right. Oh, we'll get to it. So that's basically what we're talking about with the bodily autonomy thing. It'll come up a little bit more
I also
clearly later.
don't believe in the personhood of zygotes and fetuses, but that's not an argument that's going to convince anybody. Like that gets into a really esoteric political.
Yeah, I agree.
philosophical
The like
argument.
personhood
Yeah,
argument's really
understood.
hard,
So
but the problem is, and now that we've gone over it and like we understand what we were talking about with the personhood thing, it's like impossible to have this conversation without the bodily autonomy and personhood and legalism all bleeding into each other as we talk about this stuff. So we're going to see a lot of that.
I mean, we could get to that if we get to it, but it doesn't really matter because if you're talking about bodily autonomy, that that's based off of whether you are quote unquote not a person or a person. So it wouldn't really matter to you if I argued based on it being a person, right?
Yeah, if we're going to argue the bodily autonomy thing, then we can operate on the shared assumption that that we can assign personhood to a fetus, even though I don't personally believe that. But for the sake of the bodily autonomy argument, we can.
This part is good, and this is the kind of thing that is intended if you remember when we were talking about competitive debate, what is intended by the definitions portion is you need to have a shared basis of what we're talking about. And so like for the purposes of this debate, we're just going to operate as though fetuses are persons from the point of conception, because that is the agreement we've made here. That is, both sides have agreed to it, and we can treat it like as such. It's also a lot cleaner of a discussion when you don't have mixed into that. Well, is a fetus a person at 3 months? Or what about 3 months and 1 day? And like, I don't think there's that bright line, and avoiding it does make things cleaner, though a lot more difficult for the pro-choice position, because now you have to accept that a life is being taken, and there is an instinctive uncomfortability with that prospect.
Yeah.
Okay. And then in the unlikelihood that I'm able to convince you right here live on stream that the bodily autonomy argument is incredibly flawed, then I'm assuming after that you'd be like, okay, well, it's not a person anyway, and then we would have that discussion.
Yeah, sure, but I would if we had to back up to that point and I had to start arguing that point, I would feel as though I lost this conversation anyway. If I have to retreat to that point, then I feel like I've already conceded too much ground. So we'll see how it goes.
I would tend to agree with that. But
so do you want to kind of just lay out your like exactly what the bodily autonomy argument is for you and why you believe that?
Yeah, sure.
This is where already like Tyler is doing a really good job. Like I don't even mean like in an optical sense of like taking the reins here, but he's also guiding the conversation, I think, in a really productive way of like, okay, let's establish a shared position, or like what our discussion is, or like how we're going to, like the grounds that we agreed to for the purposes of this discussion. Now that we've done that, let me give you the opportunity to flesh out your argument as you see it, as opposed to like attacking what I think your argument is. I really do think Tyler comes to this in very good faith, and this is a pretty good example of that. Of like, okay, we're on common ground. Please give your argument in its full. Now that said, there are some instances where he does do some like bad faith stuff. We'll come back to that.
So in society, legally, at least in this country,
This is what I
we
mean
don't
about
have
the
a
legalism
precedent
stuff.
established where a person is expected to sacrifice their bodily autonomy to preserve the life of an entity for whom they have responsibility. That is not a legal expectation that we have. So the example that I usually like to use is this one. If you're driving a car drunk and you get in a car accident, the car accident leaves you injured but the other person near comatose. The state cannot force you to donate your blood or anything else, any other part of your body, in order to preserve the life of the person who is a victim of your car accident. Even
So part of what is built in here is the same thing that gets built into other examples that I didn't discuss, where pro-choice philosophers have basically like built in like, okay, let's assume all of these, like, so when he's talking about like let's assume it's your fault, that's because a lot of anti anti-abortion arguments are like, well, it's your fault, you had sex in the first place, and yet it wouldn't. What the part of the point is, it wouldn't matter if it was your fault. That said, the blame there is kind of nebulous. I don't agree with that connection, but I also don't think. Well, I guess it will come up, but we'll get to it when it does.
even though the incident was your fault, and even though you are, in this hypothetical, the only person who could save them immediately enough, the state cannot criminally penalize you for not choosing to do so. So it's unfortunate, even if you believe that fetuses are persons, which I know you do, but it seems like there are grave legal consequences that could arise from us believing that one has a responsibility to sacrifice their bodily autonomy in those situations.
Okay, so then I would say in this scenario that you have a moral obligation to help that person. But here's what I would.
So notice already the disconnect. Vosh was talking about, legally speaking, the state should not be allowed to compel you to help this person, but the response is, morally speaking, I think you ought to. Well, maybe you should, and depending on what that help would entail, but you're already talking cross purposes.
Let's say, so in your scenario, I'm going to kind of break this down for you. So you're saying that, and I want to make sure that I understand your argument completely. I don't want to straw man you, so correct me if I'm wrong. All right, so you're saying that, okay, so you're drunk, so there's a drunk driver, you hit somebody, and then I guess you wake up, and then they have to be reliant on, so they're physically dependent on you, kind of like in pregnancy, right?
Yes.
Okay, so they're physically dependent on you, and then you're saying that, well, you can't be forced to sacrifice your bodily autonomy for them, right?
Yes.
Okay. So for one, to make this analogous, we would have to say, like, analogous to pregnancy, you'd have to say that the drunk driver won't face criminal charges if they decide to give up their bodily autonomy. Do you grant me that?
I'm not exactly sure what he means there. The drunk driver won't face charges if they don't. Oh, wait, hold on. Let's hear it again.
Face criminal, like analogous to pregnancy, you'd have to say that the drunk driver won't face criminal charges if they decide to give up their bodily autonomy. Do you grant me that?
No.
I'm not exactly sure why he's getting
Because
at
in the
that.
act of pregnancy, having sex isn't illegal, whereas drunk driving is illegal.
So yeah, that's another thing that's pretty important. One of the things that makes analogies very difficult for pregnancy is that the act that gets you there is fine. I know a lot of like fundamentalists are gonna screech about like premarital sex is bad, but it doesn't matter. Like, even if that, first of all, that's not the case. But also a lot of times, like, what if you're married and you need an abortion, right? Then is it okay? But ultimately, like, sex is an okay thing. It's not illegal. It shouldn't be illegal in any way. Well, maybe not in any way. Maybe sex with minors, it should be very illegal. But you get what I mean, right? Like the getting there, you did in pretty legal means. The difficulty in analogy of like, well, this is a person driving drunk. That's illegal, right? And we're going to see more examples where we're trying to get around that issue, and it's really difficult to find an analogous situation where you'll be in a situation where you kind of did nothing wrong to get there, but now you're in a position where someone's relying on your bodily autonomy.
So in that instance, the only reason why criminal penalties would be levied against you, the driver, would be because of your decision to drive drunk, whereas nobody's criminalizing the act of sex itself.
No, so that's not what you're comparing though. What you're comparing is the actual physical dependency. Like, you are responsible. You did something to where that other person is completely reliant on you. They're completely dependent on you.
This is, by the way, why the example I gave previously, and the famous one, is that you don't choose, like you just wake up and this happened to you, because often pregnancy is like that. Often people take preventative measures, and birth sometimes birth control doesn't work, um, or whatever. Like a lot of things can lead to this. Another example I had heard is like, if you had opened the window to your apartment and then uh like a fungal spore drifted in the breeze and then like started growing on your carpet. The analogy being just that, well, you did a thing that could allow this to happen, but clearly you didn't do anything wrong by doing so. And the fact that this thing is now growing doesn't mean that you're obligated to it because you opened the window. There are a lot of examples that try to build in the like that try very very hard to get around the like, okay, but you didn't do anything wrong by getting pregnant, which is true,
Right? The same way as in pregnancy, you did something where they are completely dependent on you. Now, if you wanted to like actually argue in good faith and you wanted to properly analogize this, you would say that, okay, so like in your scenario, through the actions of, like, let's say that I'm the drunk driver. So in your scenario, through the actions of my own, I force that other person to be in a state of dependency on me, just like a mother forces a fetus to be in a state of dependency on her.
Okay, I actually forgot completely. I started by saying he was operating in good faith. I completely forgot about a lot of the stuff he does. I'm gonna resend that and we'll praise at the end. But that example already is pretty loaded, right? And we can all see that. He's saying like the mother did something that forced the fetus to be like, well, not necessarily, right? Like sometimes birth control doesn't work, or cases of incest or rape, uh, or maybe they wanted the child wanted to get pregnant, but then like now like sometimes fetuses die in the womb or whatever, and like an abortion is needed. I don't think that's what we're talking about, obviously, but like to say the mother forced the fetus into this position gives a lot more of a sense of like they chose to put this person in this position. But most of the time when people have unwanted pregnancies, they didn't want to be pregnant. It's not that they wanted to be pregnant and then got an abortion anyway. Um, if that were the case, then maybe I could understand calling it the mother forcing the fetus into this position. But no, it's not that they're being forced. It's that it happened. Um, there's a lot of culpability that Tyler will assign to expectant mothers that is honestly a little gross, but won't be, I think, enough addressed.
Now, if this person dies, in the drunk driver and the person that I hit. So if the person dies due to my actions of drunk driving, then really I killed them, right? So I totally killed them. I'm responsible for their death. I killed them, right? The same way that in abortion, that if they die due to the mother's actions of abortion, I mean, technically also the doctor, but I digress. But yeah, okay, so same thing there. But in both instances, I'm either going to be held responsible for killing them and be charged with the penalty of that crime, or I can allow them to use my resources from my body and not be charged for killing them. Right? That's exactly what we're talking. Like, if you really wanted to make it analogous, that's what it would be. Otherwise, if you're saying that the act
I disagree that his rephrasing is analogous, but I don't want to dive too much into it.
You didn't properly analogize. So if you want to make it analogous, then you would have to say yes.
It's so convoluted. I don't want to like rephrase it or reframe it.
In my quote unquote utopia,
we'll get better examples later.
If we made abortion illegal.
So it's funny you say that, Peachy Keen. Should have used an example where the driver slipped on ice or something instead of being drunk. We'll get a better example later where it's basically like, you're driving, you're just a bad driver, and it's like you get into an accident. You don't like crash into somebody. You like maybe you swerve on the highway, hit a lamppost or whatever, and your passenger or something is the one who gets injured. Well, like being a bad driver isn't morally wrong. Getting into an accident is like unfortunate, but it's not necessarily something that we penalize for. I guess slipping on ice would be a better example even than that. But now they're in a position, are you required to sacrifice your bodily autonomy to help this person? Kind of like what you were saying. This is why I don't want to deconstruct the claim that this is a disanalogous example, because it's not a great one. We'll get a better one later. But part of the problem of abortion is that it is very difficult to find truly analogous situations to compare things to.
then yes, you will not be charged if you don't kill that person. If you allow them to use your body because you forced them there in the first place, then you will not face penalties.
But drunk driving is illegal. It's a criminal act, whether or not you hurt or kill anybody. This is disanalogous. In the example that we're using here, we're only
I agree.
talking
Your
about...
analogy is disanalogous.
Well, the way in which you're trying to apply it is disanalogous. In the context that we're applying this argument here, the only thing we're interested in is whether or not the state can criminalize your decision to not use your body to support the life you are responsible for. The only element in which this is disanalogous is that sex is not illegal, whereas drunk driving is. But that shouldn't change the fact that if you get into that car accident, if you cause another person to be on death's door and you choose not to support them with your own life, you aren't being criminally charged for not supporting them. You're being criminally charged for drunk driving. The state has no
you're not being
legal
charged
way.
just for that. You're being charged for killing them.
Well, you're being charged for the action which led to that situation. Not
So this is where I get things. There's a problem with the analogy where things get a little complicated because yes, you would be charged with. If I'm not mistaken, it would be felony murder, which is basically like if someone dies during the act of you committing another crime or committing a felony. If I'm not mistaken, that's what felony murder is. And so yeah, if you like hit someone while drunk, and he said it was a passenger in the car, but it was already misframed as hitting somebody while drunk driving. Then like yeah, I think that is felony murder. I don't know about the passenger though, and it's possible you would be charged, but now we're going back and forth between the legalism and the moral consideration.
for your decision to not assist them with your with the support of your own body.
Wait. If you're drunk driving and no one knows that you're drunk driving, you're not charged for it, right?
Well, sure, but it's still illegal.
Okay, and if you sure, but if you hit somebody, then now that's like a legit. You actually cause the death. Excuse me, of someone else, right?
Well, yeah, if they die.
Okay, right, for sure. So my point is that if you're saying that it doesn't matter, then it shouldn't matter of what I just said, right? So it would be completely analogous. I made it more analogous that way. Now, if you cannot come up
This
with an
example's so
analogy
bad. We'll
to
get
where
to a better one in a second.
forcing someone into a state of dependency on you, you could find some kind of circumstance where it is not criminal in the act, then I'd say that's really on you. That's not my problem. Like,
Well,
you just didn't make it analogous.
The reason why we don't have many examples of those is because society has been set up in such a way as to eliminate the possibility of you putting people in a state of dependency without some kind of crime or unethical act taking place. Like, you can, if you want to, you can think of like esoteric arguments here. Like, let me think of an example. If you're in a refugee, no, let me think.
I can analogize.
If you're out camping in the forest and you have a tent and you have food in that tent because you're camping, and then a person who has been out in the wilderness starving while you're out walking around invades your tent and starts taking some of your food, it was through your actions and your relative material availability that they came to be in that position. But you would have every legal right to kick them out or to deny them food.
So you didn't force them into that state of dependency. They actually made the conscious decision to go ahead and invade your space. A fetus.
This is
does not
another
make the
thing where
conscious
things
decision.
become very
Correct.
difficult to
Circumstances forced them into
analogize.
that position. Otherwise, they would die.
What circumstances?
The circumstances that they would starve if they didn't have that food.
That's
Okay,
a terrible
even
example
if
again.
someone
Yeah,
would
I
starve,
agree,
are
and it's
they
because they're so
allowed, or
hard to
do we
find good
permit people,
ones.
If a homeless person is going to starve, if I don't let them into my home, do I have to let them into my home?
I don't know. Do you think that your convenience is worth more than their right to life?
But here's the thing: I didn't force them into that state of dependency. If I like kidnapped them and I was forcing them to starve or whatever, then that would be different. But I didn't force them into that state of dependency. See, I think that you keep missing.
So this is again where he's like really insistent on the expectant mothers are forcing the fetus into a state of dependency. I think he needs a lot more pushback on that, because the example was pretty good. The only problem I have with the camping example is that usually, like, if you're camping, you'll probably be okay. Like, you can go get more food, or like you can leave or whatever. But like if you're in a situation where like that food is like required, see, the problem is like it. I think most people would look at the example Vosh gave and go, nah, it'd actually be pretty messed up to say like, no, you have to go starve and die because I don't want to give you some of my food, even though like I could get more. And if you couldn't get more, then we have the instance of like, well, when the pregnancy would be harmful to the mother, in which case, like, yeah, then that's the self-defense argument again, which I think isn't what we're talking about. We're talking about beyond just the self-defense argument. So, like, so far these examples have been almost like counterproductive for Vosh, and this is what I mean about like just a lot of really bad arguments for a position I tend to agree with.
That point.
Does it matter if you're the one who forced them? If circumstances force them into that position, it's still a matter of convenience versus life, is it not?
No, because see, I absolutely believe that's how my whole argument is framed, right? So I can talk about the personhood part, but you don't really care. But the last part that you would probably more so care about is that if you force another person to be in a state of dependency on you, like physical state of dependency on you, you cannot remove that dependency knowing that they will die. You are completely responsible for them, right? Now, I'm not saying you physically couldn't do it, but I'm saying that you should face, you should definitely feel morally bad for it, but you should definitely also face like legal consequences. So
I think an example, I was trying to think like what would be an example that I think might be pretty analogous. And I think the one I would use is a modified version of one I'd heard from another philosopher whose name I forget because it's been so long. But basically the idea is, like, let's say we live in a world where, and it is known that it's the case like this, there are airborne particles that, if like they get into your house and land on you, will grow like on your side as a growth, as like a living thing. So everyone in this, but they only ever do get in like between certain hours, between like 7 and 8 p.m. Sure. So most people in this world, like even if they like to have their window open, they'll close their window during that time period. And you're asleep on your couch and you wake up and you have one of these mold particles. You see that it's grown on you. It's already started to grow. It's already there. Now some people will say, well, you shouldn't have left your window open. Well, maybe you didn't. And if you did, like that was maybe like a mistake, but I don't think that's that big of a deal for this example. Or maybe there's a crack in your window. This would be the equivalent of contraception failing. Should you be required to have this thing grow on you until it like sprouts and then becomes its own creature and jumps off? Or do you have a right to your own bodily autonomy to remove this growth? I would argue that it would be reasonable for you I would argue that your bodily autonomy should allow you to remove the growth, even if you did just forget to close your window. And I want to be clear that in this example, it is unclear whether you did or didn't, because it's not necessarily your fault. But even if you did just leave the window open, that doesn't give this growth a right to your body. This would be a better analogy for the argument that Vosh is trying to make. If there are issues with it, please, I encourage you, find them, because I want a discussion on this is, I think very interesting, and something I would encourage you to do more thinking about it. So if there are problems, feel free to clap back. But I think that is a better analogy than the ones we've heard so far, or I think even will get.
And I could tell you, because you were talking about something about there are not many instances of.
If you want, I can provide an example.
Well, no, you've already provided a couple examples. If you don't
One
mind,
that's perfectly
I'd like
analogous, if you would prefer.
I'd like to provide one.
Okay.
So let's say that because you're talking about bodily. Okay, so let me ask you this before I do this. Let me preface this. Do you believe that bodily autonomy always trumps the right to life of someone else?
I would have a real hard time coming up with a situation where it doesn't.
There are specific let me think. There are instances where a soldier, I suppose, they sort of give up their bodily autonomy to an extent.
What to like the state?
But yeah, to the state.
Sure.
For,
I mean, I'm not even
for an
about
average
that.
person, unless there's some sort of contractual incident which is involved, like they actually meaningfully, purposefully, and without coercion sign away some element of their bodily autonomy. With that exception, I would say that yes, bodily autonomy will always trump the life of another. Yeah.
Okay, so even if it will harm another person.
Yeah, we have to. Otherwise, you get into some really, really dangerous.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear, and I think it seems intuitively understandable that you have the right to your body, and if you didn't, a lot of really bad things could be the case, right? Like if you just in any way didn't have the complete rights to your body, that would be pretty bad.
Okay. And also, even if you invite that person, you're basically saying you can rescind consent at any time.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, unless there's some very specific contractual obligation that you've mutually
Okay,
established.
all right. So
And we can see that, by the way, in discussions of what constitutes consent. Like if someone is having intercourse and they revoke their consent, that is basically an invocation of their bodily autonomy, of saying like, I have the right to my body. I no longer give you permission to access it. You need to stop, and that is a violation of consent if they don't. You know, if you don't have the right to it, then you don't even own it. Well, so I personally have issues with the argument that you own your body or that you own yourself. I don't think people are property, so I don't think you own yourself. But I know a lot of people do find that pretty compelling. Um, I don't think you own yourself, but you do have the rights to your body. That is like, and that is irrespective of ownership, because it's just not a property discussion, right? This is an autonomy discussion as opposed to a property one. But if you take the position that you own your body, then yeah. Well, I'm saying that those are the same thing. If you don't have the right to it, then you don't even own it. I mean, like in a way, yeah. I like for the people who that would find it compelling to say that, or like who would agree with the claim that you own your body, then yes. If you don't have the right to it, in what sense do you own it? What would it mean to own your body if you don't have the right to of bodily autonomy and like and to the right to allow or refuse access to it, you know?
and impose this thought experiment. So, say that a skydiving instructor invites you to go skydiving. Now, because you're new, they buddy up with you and attach themselves to your back, and then you both jump out. Now, about 10 seconds after jumping, the instructor is no longer feeling this shit, right? And they decide to rescind consent. They no longer want you to use their body or their resources, right, or their property, and they use both. And the use of both of their body and their resources is taken away, right? You fall to the ground and die. Did the instructor do anything wrong?
So I think this analogy fails twice. The first one is that this is a situation where again you are assuming a position of like intentional force on the other person. The skydiving instructor, or I guess not the instructor, the instructee, was given every impression that they were going to be protected by this, and like told explicitly, given the explicit understanding that they are going to be cared for by the skydiving instructor. This is not the case with pregnancy. A lot of pregnancy is unintended, which means it definitely was not well, not intended, right? It wasn't, they weren't going out, they weren't trying to have this situation occur, but also, there's not this idea of giving someone a false impression or forcing them into this position, which Tyler seems insistent on, even though I think it is inappropriate. The other problem is, and this is one that won't get pushed back on, and part of why I wanted to watch this debate, is that is not bodily autonomy. Autonomy and bodily autonomy are two different things. You have the right to your body, and who has access to your body. You do not have there can be restrictions, however, on what actions you are allowed to take. That is an action and not like a connection to your body. You do not have the right in a case like that, especially a contractual one, but also on a moral basis, to enter into a position where your action will you don't have the right to like to force someone into a situation where you can. Well, I guess this is just the contractual thing. Like you signed a contract that you will not kill this person or not let this person die. That is not the same thing as or that is not a bodily autonomy issue. That is an agreement you have made on what your actions will be. We'll get to the action stuff as opposed to bodily autonomy stuff later, but also like this is where again this is back to the assumption that people who get pregnant intentionally do so, and therefore it's wrong to get an abortion because they intended for this fetus to be in this position. I don't have the bodily autonomy to punch someone else in the face with my body. Right, like this is what I mean, like because it, in a sense, you could say like that is because it violates the bodily autonomy of someone else, which might be what he wants to get to with the whole fetus thing, except that the person who is pregnant didn't how do I put this? The person who said it did not intend for this circumstance did not set out for that whereas like the fetus is doing the violation of bodily autonomy, whereas you know someone who gets pregnant might inadvertently put themselves in a position where someone else's bodily autonomy is attached to theirs. It's kind of not the same thing. The intention, I think, a little bit matters. This is actually more interesting than I thought. Maybe talking with this guy, we can get to like if I mean I'm not going to be able to, but maybe we can get into some actually like really good arguments because as I'm saying, I'm like actually this is like a fairly good argument against abortion on an ethical basis, but again that wouldn't change anything on like a political basis.
Yeah, I would say so.
What did he do wrong?
I would say that part of being a skydiving instructor involves some contractual obligation to ensure the health and well-being of people who sign
Let's
up
say that
for
he's not a
classes.
skydiving instructor by any official capacity. He's just like an expert skydiver, maybe even one of your friends.
Mhm.
Okay, but by no, he's not. He doesn't have his own, fucking business or anything. I just labeled him a skydiving instructor, but you could say he's a skydiving expert.
Well, then we still have the same problem
Sure.
of like
Did
he
you
agreed
wrong?
to like
Yeah,
a contract.
then in that case, I would say that you would probably have to legally differentiate the bodily expectations associated with carrying a fetus to term for 9 months and all the expenses and trials therewithin, as opposed to the inconvenience associated with maintaining your hold over that individual until you reach the ground, which would thus save their life.
Well, wait a minute. So, but hold on. So you already said that the bodily autonomy trumps the right to life of someone else, even
Yeah, but
if it
that's
puts them
not
in danger.
really bodily autonomy. If you're
Sure
like
it is.
if you're
In
playing,
or on your body.
you know that game where it's like that corporate trust game where you hold another person's hands and both of you lean backwards so you both prop each other up with
Sure.
that thing. If you do that with your friend over a cliffside, so you're leaning back over the ground, they're leaning back over a precipice, and you let go because you like don't care anymore, that would be
Yeah.
murder because the circumstances of that arrangement and the means by which they came to die were in the context of a situation where you had every ability to save their life with essentially no inconvenience to yourself, and in fact had agreed to beforehand.
So because I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
Yeah, and had agreed to beforehand, as a matter of fact. I mean, part of the
Right.
the
Yeah.
game. there
Part of
is
what's
to
important
not
here
fall. That's the
is
purpose
a
of the
mutual
game.
understanding in
But you
these
chose not to.
examples that
So what
does
if you
not
don't
exist
agree?
as pregnancy.
Well, then
Right,
you
so
wouldn't
say-
do
so
the
Right, because when you have sex, you don't agree to the terms of having a child. You agree to the terms of having sex. And in fact, a lot of times, people are taking precautions to make sure they don't get pregnant. But even if they don't, in the event that they do, they didn't have an agreement with this fetus, right? They didn't set out or have any intention of this happen most of the time.
trust fall, right?
Well, no. So say in this analogy that I just gave you, or you could even use the analogy that you gave me. Either one. So say that you force this person over the cliff, right? And they are now hold. You ever see those fucking weird people who go?
Now
on,
we're
like,
back
those
to
tall building
forcing the
rooftops and
person
hang
over
each
the
other
cliff,
the-
which I
over the
think is
ledge?
disanalogous.
Yes, I've seen Russians.
Fucking weird, bro. It's so weird. But let's say instead of this being like your friend, or they could even have been your friend, but they push you over the ledge, right? You had no intention of doing that. You did not consent. They push you over the ledge, and they are holding on to you, and you are dangling fucking 50 stories up, or whatever you want to say, right? So now, and if they let you go, because your stance here was like, well, okay, well, you had this contractual agreement. Okay, so there is no contractual agreement here, right? They didn't consent to
Well,
this,
then
right?
it would
You
just be
forced
murder,
them,
wouldn't it?
Right, you
right?
push them
because
over
you
the
forced
edge.
them into that state of dependency, right?
Right,
No,
but
it'd be because you
pregnancy
pushed
isn't
them
forcing someone
over-
into the state of
over
dependency.
You
until-
force. Okay, did you or did you not force them into a state of dependency on your body?
There's a huge so what we're doing right
Is it
here
a
is
yes or no?
Something to keep in mind. I think the principal thing as to why I would argue that becoming pregnant isn't an act of force on the fetus into that position is that that a person who did not want to be pregnant, if they were able to choose for their body to not do the same, right? Like if they were able to choose for their egg to not be fertilized, they would make that choice. They're not able to. And so it's clearly not a choice they made and therefore a force that they're engaging in. It is a thing that happens to them because if they could choose, they would not choose that.
Oh,
So
did
wait,
you or
hold,
did
wait,
you
hold
not?
on. There's a reason why you just said yes or no, and it's because this is a rhetorical trick often used by the anti-choice people. This is
It's not even a rhetorical trick. It's testing your
It's-
logical consistency.
no,
if
what
you
it
can't,
is-
if
what
you
it is
can't actually
rhetorical- hold
operate
on,
in good
please.
faith, then you're logically
it's
inconsistent.
rhetorical obfuscation. So can you understand there might be a difference between being forced in a position with regards to a person not like having a child because like birth control failed, and then they have to carry that over the course of 9 months, and being forced in a situation like you deliberately push someone over a building. Like the legal and moral differences between these two like situations are so significant and so numerous that I don't think any applicable comparison can even be drawn between the two. I mean, you push them over the building. Even if you pull
One thing, another thought I had that I think is kind of interesting towards this discussion as a challenge I would have towards someone like Dylan Bluntman is to say, okay, let's say we lived in a world where medical technology has improved to the point where from the moment of conception, a a fetus can be brought to term outside of a womb, right? Like let's say you find out you're pregnant, you can go to the doctor, you can say I don't want to be pregnant anymore. They extract the fetus, they put it in like whatever incubator, and it will go to term and be born as a child, and like maybe we even have systems in place to make sure that child can live a good life, but you don't have to be pregnant anymore and you are no longer obligated to that child. Would there be anything wrong with someone who got pregnant doing that? Well, or would you think a person would have a right to choose not to be pregnant, if the child can exist outside of the womb? The argument that I would make is that yeah, they have that right because they have the right to their bodily autonomy. And the only consideration that he would have is to whether are we causing a death? But I think that doesn't necessarily. But then we get to like, okay, so now you have to. Well, I guess we circle back to this argument, right? Does your right to bodily autonomy overwrite someone's right to life? And I guess I haven't really solved anything. A lot of my thoughts are in progress, and and so you can see here, like I don't necessarily have all the answers. I'm working them through myself, and I'm like, oh, this seemed interesting, but actually it isn't all that valuable. One of the difficulties of this discussion is that a lot of analogies don't actually like go towards making any clear case. I wonder if there is something you could do with like that example, but I'd have to think more on it.
hold them back over, I'm pretty sure that would at the very least be assault or attempted murder. I don't know. I'm not. Depends on what the state thinks they could go for.
Okay, so did you or did you not force them into a state of dependency? You didn't answer my question.
Force them into a state of dependency. Sure, if you want to use force them into a state of dependency,
I
in
would
such
not
a
agree to this.
broad way
I think it's
that it
a mistake
encompasses
to agree to
everything
that.
from having sex with a person to attempted murder, then sure.
Okay, so you force that person into a state of dependency that they
I would not
otherwise
agree
not have been there
in any way.
had it not been for your actions.
Yeah, but that's like causality.
Okay, so we've already agreed, or at least you said earlier.
This would be analogous to saying like I forced someone to like get rained on because like when I walked outside my door, the butterfly effect like of my closing the door caused a gust of wind that spiraled into a rainstorm on the other side of the planet, and I caused them to be rained on. Like, no, I would not call this force in any way.
That pregnancy is the act of forcing that life into being. You force them into a state of dependency there, right?
No, I don't think so. You don't force
You said that
anything when you
earlier.
have sex.
So wait a minute. So you're saying that pregnancy does not force a new life into being?
No, they emerge.
Pregnancy,
You're not forcing
yes.
an entity to do anything.
Getting pregnant,
Okay,
no.
so you didn't. Okay, what's the definition of force?
This is a philosophical context. There are like 40.
What is force?
Force, as in an action leads to another?
Yeah,
or
I
force
agree.
as
He
in
should just say
coercive
no. But like,
entity?
he's building in. I think I know where he's coming from. Where he's like trying to build in like, well, I guess in a way that like, if we're willing to say that any action you take that causes another action, right? He's like, if in the way that causality is force, mass time acceleration. I don't know what mass time acceleration is.
Into doing something, it could be
Yeah,
either.
you achieve or bring about something by coercion or effort of your own, right?
Right, but you wouldn't say
That doesn't
then
clarify for me.
that
Again, I don't know what that means.
starving man in the forest, you forced them into coming into your tent, even though it was by the effort which you brought your food there that led to them being there.
That isn't your effort.
Well, no,
If
yeah,
you-
it absolutely is. You brought the
if you
food
did
there.
something
Yeah.
that forced that,
Is the chat
no.
better if I put it over here?
If you
Is
did
that
something that forced
clearer?
that starving person there, like you physically forced
try it
them
there for a
then
bit.
yeah, absolutely.
Wait, but
so,
you don't,
so
I
hold
don't
on, so hold on,
physically
so hold on,
force
so
a
hold on.
fetus, or well, I don't have a womb, but nobody physically forces a
Okay.
fetus to anything. When you have sex, the
So
fetus doesn't exist.
Okay, so wait a minute.
Let me know if you have a preference,
So-
chat, as to where I put the
Okay,
where I
say
put the
that you
chat on
had
screen.
like a. I'm trying to figure out why you're not getting this part, but okay. So say that you had a button, right?
Mhm.
Okay. Now if you have if you have this button, and if you press the button, two things will happen. One, $100 will manifest.
Oh,
into
mass times
existence right
accelerate.
there in
Oh,
front of you.
yeah,
Bam,
okay.
$100, right? COVID times, you definitely could use that $100, right?
I think
so,
I get
okay.
it.
So $100 will manifest in front of you. But also by pressing this button, there's a chance that someone in the world who otherwise would not have been killed at that time immediately dies. Now, whether that chance is 1%, 10%, 50%, or 90% is irrelevant. It's still more than 0% if you chose not to push the button. So you push the button, someone dies. So through your own effort, did you bring about that conclusion?
I don't know. You're killing a living person, aren't you? Or like, how is it happening? Is it-
Hold on.
That's
hold on,
a
hold
that's
on,
an
hold on. It doesn't
interesting
matter
one.
if it's-
I kind of want to work through that. Well, okay. Uh, the he's saying like you're caught like it doesn't matter what the percentage is. I think it does matter for what it's worth, right? If the percentage is something like 1 in a trillion for someone to die, then when you push it, you have a pretty reasonable belief that nobody will die, right? The odds of that happening, literally 1 in a trillion. You'd have to press it on average a trillion times, and one person would die. Um, how is someone dying? Is someone dying? The button literally attached to a knife with the person on the other side, and me pushing the button. Yeah, I mean, it's supposed to be like kind of a magical thing, but like you're supposed to think of it a little less literally. Like what is about the mechanism there? Though the mechanism could matter, I suppose. If I press a button instead of a freak goes out and assassinates someone, then that's not really my fault. I guess that's true. Yeah, like who made the button? But when we put it in terms of the analogy that's intended, right? Of like, well, when you have sex, there is a percent chance that pregnancy occurs. What that percent chance is varies, and especially with contraception, that can be exceptionally low. Uh, the odds, like the odds I think do matter, but even if they don't, then like, is it forcing? I mean, in a way, in the sense that like that's how it works. I don't know, but I disagree because I don't know, because it is kind of separate. Like they're, I don't know. This is kind of a tough one. I don't like this analogy for a lot of reasons, but it is. I don't have a good way. I don't have a good refutation of it.
it's living or not. Don't backtrack now because you already said that we will operate based on they are both
Well,
persons.
no,
So
it's a pretty
again,
big
I'll
difference
ask you that question.
between arbitrarily killing an entity that already exists and has been born, and you're deliberately doing so, and just
Vosh,
That now
did you
this
or
is
did
back
you
to the
not say
personhood
that
stuff.
person's not
earlier
physically
that
dependent on you.
when we were talking about bodily autonomy and we were talking about all of this, you said, "Hey, we're going to operate based off of it being a person." Did you or did you
but-
not say that?
Right, but the difference is the
So
person
don't
who's already
backtrack
wait,
now.
hold on. The person who's already been born isn't physically dependent on you. This stops being a bodily autonomy argument. Now it's just a like God of the machine argument.
I'm not even talking about. I'm not even talking about bodily autonomy at this
That's
point because
but
you were
that's the
talking
only
about,
thing I'm talking about. That's the
No,
only
no,
thing
no,
I care about.
No, Vosh. We were talking about bodily autonomy, and the reason why we went over here is because you don't agree that is forcing a life into being. I am now asking you. I'm giving you.
Yeah, I guess a similar way would be like a similar example, a better version of this example, given what Vosh was just saying, might be like if you press the button, it's not like percent chance someone will die. It's less than 1/10% chance, especially if you use contraception. It's pretty low, around there. That like a person will be like connected you with tubes and like they will hire you to live. It doesn't matter that you press that button. You have the right to be like, yeah, disconnect this fucker immediately, uh, because it would be violating your bodily autonomy. And you had a very reasonable belief that this wouldn't happen.
This
What do you mean
thought
by
experiment.
force?
Force. You achieve or you brought about something.
Well, okay, so wait,
by
let's
your
run.
own
Wait,
effort.
let's
So
run through the
hold
definitions.
on. You haven't answered my question yet. So
Okay.
I gave you this thought experiment.
It's
right?
disanalogous.
Because I'm trying.
It's completely disanalogous.
Bro, how is it well, I'm testing to see if
You
if
just
you
said it's not
understand
about
if this is
bodily
force.
autonomy. How can it be
I'm
analogous
talking
when it's
about
not
is
about?
this force? Did you force that through your own effort? Did you bring about that conclusion?
I don't. Yes.
Okay, so through your own effort, if you brought about the
Because you're
conclusion
pressing a
here,
button.
then through pregnancy, right? But it doesn't matter, right? Because I told you, yes, you're pushing a button. So if you're making that analogous to sex, right? You are engaging in sex. You don't have to have sex. You don't have to press this button.
Okay.
But you did it anyway.
So wait,
hold on. Let me finish this. Let me finish
This is completely disanalogous. We're not talking about whether or not sex is consensual.
Give me like 30 seconds, and then you can just say that I'm lying. All right?
Okay,
but
go
this
for
is what I'm saying. So okay, so go ahead. So yeah, so you just said yes. So yes, you brought about that conclusion through efforts of your own. Absolutely. Just as if you push the button.
Yeah.
Right, just as if you push the button, just as if you have sex, right? Okay, now it doesn't matter, right? The $100 is really
something that we don't know here, and I think I as much as Tyler tried to say that the percent chance doesn't matter, I think it does. One thing that we don't, a piece of information I don't even know if we have access to, is what percentage of the time does sex result in pregnancy? Because that number has to be crazy low, right? Like, because I mean, on top of people using contraception, there's also the fact that like it's the body doesn't always, like, you don't always get pregnant even if you're trying to. This is a thing couples have had issues with for many years of, sometimes it's just really difficult to get pregnant based on their circumstances or their own physiology or whatever else. And like knowing that, with, if the percent likelihood is sufficiently low, engaging in sex, and I think it is, engaging in sex, it doesn't like, you are going into it with the understanding that you're probably not going to nobody is going to get pregnant by doing this. And so you're not agreeing to the pregnancy, you're agreeing to the sex, and like one doesn't necessarily lead to the other.
That to like your fucking orgasm or whatever you want to fucking say, right? Something really cool that you like is gonna happen, right? But also by doing this, that there is a chance, a small chance. It doesn't matter what the
I think it does
size
matter.
of that chance is. You know that is a chance that you will that another person will die because of this effort that you do not have to do in the first place. You then just said yes. You through your own effort, you brought about that conclusion. So based on that, then yes, Vosh, pregnancy would be forcing. That is the definition of force.
So no, because you're not forcing anyone, because there's no one to be forced yet, is part of what I would argue, right? Even if you argue that life begins at conception, you are making an agreement before that conception occurred that person doesn't exist. You did not force them, right? And that was the point at which a decision was made.
So, no. So
yes.
What the analogous example here would be,
the only way you could, I think, have exerted force on someone who doesn't exist is through, well, I guess you could, because like you could, like through political acts you could do that, but if you make a law that everyone born will have to do whatever, like, then that would be exerted force. But then there's an amount of intentionality required. I don't know that you could, like, I guess you in a way could, in the way that we shape the world. But then you would have to say that, like, you should be morally culpable for like littering in a way that, like, for like, you should be morally culpable for genocide every time you litter because climate change is poised to eradicate human life, kind of thing. Like, the extrapolations are kind of unreasonable.
that abortion is forcing bodily removal for the fetus.
Oh my God!
Wait,
Are
wait,
not understanding what I'm
hold on.
saying?
You just said I can talk. Hold on. So the example you just provided is analogous only to the act of abortion, which is obviously an act of force. They have to use forceps. But no, this is completely disanalogous to the act of bringing the fetus into existence to begin with. So we can run through the definitions of force if you would like to.
Hold on, before you run through the definitions, just tell me exactly how I mean, you literally just agreed with me. Do you know what you're doing right now? You are special pleading. You are giving these exact same, you are giving the circumstance. You're saying, yes, Tyler, that right there, through your own effort, you brought about that conclusion. There is nothing disanalogous between what we just broke down through you pushing that button to the act of pregnancy.
Your act of pushing that button, which is a deliberate and purposeful action, which leads to, and again, I'm conceding for the purposes of this argument, the personhood of a fetus, the death of a person is analogous to abortion. But the only reason why we say abortion is morally justified in a bodily autonomy sense is because that fetus is dependent on your body, and thus its existence within your body exacts a toll on you. So this has nothing to do with the ethical question regarding personhood or abortion.
I would want to pose to someone like Tyler, like, okay, so do you think it's like murder to remove like a tapeworm from your body, like a parasite living in your, like it's dependent on your bodily autonomy. It's like dependent on your body in a way, like even if you like, I don't know, even if you did a thing that you knew could result in getting a tapeworm, right? Like there's you're forcing it to be in the situation. Like is that murder? I would hesitate to call it that. Now maybe we would say, well, it's not a human, so it's therefore it's not like it doesn't have the rights to that kinds of protection. In which case, then like, well, one, you can start to push back on the personhood thing of like, okay, but now you're saying like a fetus is entitled to additional a fetus that is like a cluster of cells. It's clearly not like a living thing in the same way that we talk about with parasites has more rights than this like fully living thing, and you have to like make special pleading cases for like humanism as opposed to like other species have fewer rights,
or anything regarding
which maybe
this.
they'd be okay
The
with, but
fact
like it
of
gets
the
really
matter
complicated.
is that so you oh my god you've relied on a lot of really disanalogous things, like the fact that we even went to murdering people is the same as abortion.
I've made your analogies more analogous. But
So
go ahead.
wait, hold on. Let's work on a perfectly analogous analogy then.
Well,
Okay?
hold on. You're
Wait,
going
wait,
into
wait,
something
wait,
else. Hold on, bro.
And this is what we should expect. We're gonna get jumping,
I'm not trying to
be jumping from
continuously
analogy
interrupt
to
you, but what I'm
analogy.
saying is that if you go off into other topics without finishing this one first, right, you are dodging the question.
Wait, I'm
right?
not
So
dodging
here's-
any question. I just
You are
responded to the
dodging
point
it.
you made.
Okay,
It's disanalogous.
Okay, so here's what I'm saying. So either you're not understanding me or I'm miscommunicating.
No,
So
try.
either way, I'm gonna try
I
and
ask you a
try and do this
question?
again. Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
But
so
can you
hold, so
allow
wait,
me-
let's run through this, okay?
Okay,
So
will you allow me to go into this after you ask me this question?
no, because I'm gonna want your answer to this question, but then you can go into whatever you want.
I'm saying I'm going to answer you, but I'm saying then can we go back to this?
Sure, though
Okay, go ahead.
I question, I don't know, the
ahead,
worthwhileness
ask me
of
the
that.
question.
But okay, let's say you are driving. You have friends in your car.
You're going into bodily autonomy.
You're not. Bodily autonomy is the only relevant instance here. That's the only thing I care about.
This is why I'm saying, Vosh, I understand that, man. I completely understand that we are talking about bodily autonomy. Again, the reason why, remember how we got here in the first place, right? Because what we were talking about, as we were talking about whatever
I'm not
analogy
gonna
we
get
were
a chance
talking
to get
about.
into this example, but go on.
Oh man.
No, you are. But what I'm saying is that the reason why we got on here is because you said, well, no, Tyler, that right there, the act of pregnancy is not the forcing of someone, right? Because my whole thing was is that you can't force another person into a state of dependency. And you were like, well, that's not force. That is why we were talking about force. So it's directly tied to this. Now you are refusing to concede when you already really have. Right, so I'm not saying you
No.
conceded your bodily autonomy argument. I'm talking about the force.
So
Is
wait, hold on.
pregnancy
Your hold on.
forcing a
So wait,
life into
I'm
being?
being very nice here for the sake of charitability, but your force argument was so poorly constructed that you analogized
you're
forcing
just
a
talking for the sake
wait,
of
wait,
talking.
hold on. You analogized forcing a fetus into existence with forcing a person into a state of dependency by pushing them off a building and grabbing their wrist at the last second. The idea that we were even in the same ballpark of ethical or legal consideration is absurd, which is why I'm trying to get us back on analogous examples so we can actually discuss
I'm just
the
waiting
issue
for them
at
to
hand
get to
here.
the next thing of
Why does it matter
import.
if it's a fetus or not? You said that it would be a person.
my
That's why I
God.
was
Here, wait,
messing
hold
with
on. Let me
like
ask this
CSS
question,
on
and
chat.
then we'll run through with
I'll
that,
fix it
okay?
later.
We can do whatever we
Yeah, go
want.
love how it
So you're
works.
driving. You have friends in the car. You're not
Okay,
a great
better
driver.
example.
You have a driver's license. You're not a great driver. Through poor driving on your part, which is in no way illegal.
Say that again. I'm sorry. I wasn't following. Say that again. I'm sorry.
You're driving with friends in the car, and you're not a great driver. You're legally allowed to drive, and you are a poor driver. Through your own fault, nobody else's fault, in ways that are not illegal, you end up crashing the car and putting one of your friends into a severe medical situation. Does the state have the legal right to force you into providing your bodily resources in order to save that friend's life? Can they criminalize you for saying, no, I love my friend, but I'm not going to sit here for 3 months while my blood gets cycled through their bloodstream?
Yeah. Again, this really isn't that much different from your original drunk driving thing. You're just saying
It's
that. Okay.
relevantly different in the sense that like you didn't do anything immoral or illegal in the process of getting there, which this guy seems to like keep coming back to.
Somehow
Like, oh, you
crashed.
forced
It is your
them.
fault, but it's not illegal. So okay, that's fine. It doesn't really change my answer that I gave
Wait,
you.
can
Right?
you answer the question though?
I'm about to. So it doesn't change. It's my original thing, right? So in your scenario, through actions of my own, I forced another person into a state of dependency on me. I'm assuming in your analogy that you're saying that they like me. I am. They have to be reliant on my body, right?
Sure. Let's say it's a rural hospital and this person needs blood now and they run out of stock. Yeah.
Yeah. So through actions of my own, I quote unquote force that person into a state of dependency on me. Again, when you're analogizing this to pregnancy and to abortion.
So I think what's important here is the level of happenstance that exists, and it's not going to be talked about very much, but like you can drive poorly and not have any of this happen, right? You can drive poorly with other people in the car and not have any of this happen. You can get into an accident with other people in the car due to your driving poorly and none of this happen. You can be in a situation like they could be seriously injured and require someone else to survive and it not be you. Like there's so many things that could happen that like this is not a likely outcome, just in the same way that when you have sex, pregnancy is not necessarily a likely outcome, especially with contraception. uh, and that likelihood I think does matter, that you are engaging in an action that you have a reasonable belief will not cause someone to be dependent on your body and now they are. I think that is a good way of putting it, but that's not. They're not going to put it. He's not going to put it that way.
Specifically, it's really no different. So in these instances, in both of these instances, whether it's your scenario or whether we're talking about if abortion would be illegal, either I'm going to be held responsible for killing them and charged with the penalty of that crime, or I can allow them. Okay, that's fine. So then say this, so that I won't be charged for any penalty of the crime. Then it's not analogous to abortion, because in this scenario, when we're talking about in a pro-life world, if you do something that forces them into a state of dependency and then you kill them.
No, I'm saying right now, should the state be able to criminally penalize you deciding to not lend your bodily autonomy for the sake of your friend's life?
That's not analogous to abortion.
So notice we're talking about, well, one, I think it is, but notice again, Vosh is approaching this from a political position, which I agree with. It makes sense. Abortion is more of a political issue than a moral one, because the moral consideration, like the moral, I guess the ethical is the phrase is the term I preferred to use. The ethical consideration can't overwhelm the ethical consideration as presented can't overwhelm the ramifications of the legal issue, right? That the state has the right to force you to use to give up your bodily autonomy in certain ways is really dangerous, as we'll get to.
But... Wait, this is not perfectly analogous. You have an innocent person who, through your actions in a non-illegal context, it's not illegal to be a bad driver, is put now in a state of...
And I would note, it's also not immoral, right? You didn't do anything immoral or illegal.
Dependency on your body.
Sure, but I didn't kill them, right? You're saying even if they die, I'm not responsible for their death.
This is the first instance. This is another thing I knew we were going to get to, and why I wanted to watch this. This is the first instance we're getting of killing versus letting die. Tyler does not make a distinction between these two. To him, they are the same thing. I would argue that there are relevant differences as far as what obligations we have towards each one. I think you are morally obligated to not kill someone in most circumstances, right? The exception being things like self-defense. However, allowing someone to die, I think there's more latitude as far as what you should be morally compelled to do. Obviously, you shouldn't just let someone die if it costs you nothing. This is the Peter Singer example of, if you see a drowning baby in a shallow pool, it seems like you have a moral obligation to save that child, because what it costs you is just merely getting a little wet. It costs you basically nothing, but their life will be forfeit if you don't. But you can come up with circumstances where it will become reasonable to not lend your aid. The example of the violinist, where, let's say, in that example I gave, where you pass out and when you wake up you're attached. Let's say instead of that, a group of doctors come to you knowingly, you're you're not attached to anyone, you're just going about your life, and a group of doctors come to you and they say, there's this dying person, they're like famous or whatever. That part doesn't really matter, but it's always part of the example as presented. Like, this person is dying, you're the only person in the world that could save them, and it would require us to attach you via medical technology and whatever to them for 10 months and like you're stuck here and you have to do it. If you think at all it could be reasonable to say no to that proposition, to say you are not obligated to do so, then you acknowledge there's a difference between killing and letting die. That if there's any thought in your head, and I think it is reasonable to say, no, I don't think I should be required to do that. If I refuse this proposition, I have not committed a murder, then clearly those two things are different. And this is a relevant distinction when it comes to abortion, in the sense that, like, that for that example is like, if you could get an abortion but the infant didn't die, then clearly you'd be permitted to do so. So like the fact that it can't exist outside of the womb is more of happenstance than intention. Now there are exceptions to this, right? If someone is in a position, like, this is where we get, like, there are cases where, yes, we're allowing a person to die would have you be morally culpable. The classic trolley problem. Not quite, because in this case it's like there's only one person on either side of the tracks. But I like your thinking at the very least. But in a case like this, the argument is like bodily autonomy is highly important. And like with the violinist example, it is exactly the bodily autonomy. It is exactly your bodily autonomy that permits you to decline being attached to that person and keeping them alive. That is the exact reason why it is acceptable. And so not allowing for that distinction, one, I think narrows the conversation. I think it's slightly dishonest, but it's a distinction Tyler doesn't make, and I think it ends up being a problem. And I don't think it's like fully adequately addressed, but it's so difficult, right? Like, this is another issue with abortion as a discussion topic, is that you often have to back up further and further into ideas that frame the conversation. Like, is it forcing a fetus into this position when you get pregnant? I think no, but it's built into the way Tyler he'll like refuse to talk about it in any other terms. Is killing and letting die the same thing? No, but he refuses to talk about it in other ways. And it's very difficult to talk about it unless you can work through these things. But I don't think we do very well in this conversation.
If they either die or you lend your bodily autonomy to them to preserve their life.
Not saving someone isn't the same as killing someone. Bob.
Oh no, he doesn't make that distinction. Never mind. I forgot that he said that, but he acts like that distinction doesn't exist. Yeah.
Fetus by aborting it, you just remove your body from it.
No, you kill it. You kill it.
See now. Okay, I guess see, that's the thing. Like, he acknowledges the distinction exists, but doesn't realize that distinction exists with abortion. Right? Like, removing the fetus from the body only kills it because it's dependent on you. In the same way that in this example, your friend would be. It is, in a sense, more accurate to say that the fetus is allowed to die. It is not continuously supported as it used to be. It is closer to allowing to die than murder. Now, you're putting it in a position where it would be dying, but in a sense, it put you in a position where it was attached to you and required your bodily autonomy, irrespective of your consent.
You kill it.
Wait, hold on.
Unless you're a fucking evictionist.
Wait, hold on.
Oh, and that's something, by the way, that often isn't discussed, is like, if we're going to assume it is a person, then it can be culpable for its actions. Now, we say, like, to some extent, children are not culpable for some of their actions, like, more like the parent is culpable, but to some extent, they are culpable for their actions, in particular when it comes to violations of the law. Like, if someone who's under the age of 18 kills someone, it's not their parents who are culpable, it's the child. Maybe the parents will be culpable if they like abuse the kid or whatever before that, but that's not this. But that's a different subject.
Hold on, I understand the issue now. I completely understand the issue now. You actually can't engage with the bodily autonomy argument because you're not capable of recognizing the distinction between killing something and not providing.
Entire fucking time.
Wait, hold on. You actually can't engage with it. There's a difference between killing something and no longer providing your bodily resources to something. There's a difference there.
Bosh. So let's break this down, man. Let's try and debate in good faith.
A good example is like if you wander into a river, you come out and you notice there's a leech on your arm. are you killing that leech by removing it? Like, what if you're the only food source available? I would argue that no, you're not. You're simply not allowing it to feed off of you in the same way you are with a fetus.
So let's break this down. In your analogy, and
you knew you could want that wandering through that river could cause a leech to attach to you. You knew that was possible. Maybe you thought it was exceptionally unlikely, and that should matter. But even to this guy, it wouldn't matter. Okay, do you think you have to let that leech feed off of you? I doubt he would agree.
Back to don't try and dodge.
We'll fix it one more level. One more level. You wake up after the car accident to find that you've already been hooked up to the friend who's on life support. You wake up
that would be analogous to rape. That would be analogous to rape. I believe in evictionism, or quote unquote, it's an abortion in cases of rape.
So we're already like, okay, I'm glad that he's on board with like, politically speaking, for like, abortion needs to be, it can't be never, right? Cases of rape needs, obviously there are political ramifications, as we discussed earlier, of like, how could you ever prove that? I think he goes on to say, like, if you can't prove it in a court of law, then you weren't raped, and therefore you have to carry it to term, which is nightmarish, and we'll get to that when it comes up. But one bit of confusion that you should expect right now is that it sounds like he's saying the person who is connected to the friend is being raped. What he means is that is closer to a situation where a person is, I don't know. It's yeah.
So your
never mind. I confused myself with how weird this is.
I didn't physically force them to be dependent on me. Someone forced me to force them. You know what I mean?
Now they have to debate whether there's a difference between killing and not saving. Yeah, so they do, but they're not going to. They're going to act. Like Vosh pointed it out, but if I remember correctly, we're going to proceed with a differing idea on the subject. Tyler agreed to the fact that those two things are different, but his prescriptions are built around the concept that they're not. Or he's saying that abortion is killing and is not an instance of not saving, even though it is closer to not saving than it is to killing. Oh, they are going to go in circles forever, Peachy Keen. Get ready. That's why I'm pretty sure we're not going to finish this.
Through no fault of your own, your bodily autonomy hinged on another person, or another person hinged on your bodily autonomy, is rape.
Are we talking about rape? Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
How can you not distinguish the difference between deliberately and purposefully killing something?
Yeah, so what it sounds like Tyler said when he said it was rape is that, like, basically it is equivalent to rape to have the person hooked up to the bad driver after the accident without their consent, which would be analogous here towards the fetus attaching itself to the mother in this case, right? Like, the fetus growing in pregnancy would be the equivalent of rape here in the analogy that we made. I don't think Tyler would agree to that, but that sounds like what he said, and he never pushes back on it, even though I think what he means to say is that in that analogy where you wake up and you're already attached to your friend after the accident would be closer to rape than sex, as opposed to the pregnancy itself would be akin to rape,
as opposed to just removing it from your bodily life support.
That one gets really confusing.
Right. Again, so if I force them, are you asking me about? I'm sorry. Ask your question again.
How can you not recognize that this is perfectly analogous?
It's not perfectly analogous because, again, let me ask, and I'm gonna break it down by asking questions. So, in a pro-life world, right? If we made abortion illegal, we make abortion illegal because we believe that is the killing of a person, right?
I would hope not, but sure.
I know you don't want that world, but I'm just saying, if it was, you understand that that's what we believe, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we would make that illegal because we believe the killing of innocent people to be wrong, immoral, and should be illegal. So this is
the word innocent does a lot of work here because, right, like bodily autonomy argument is saying they are not innocent. They are violating someone's bodily autonomy. They're already committing a moral wrong.
Same thing. So you go ahead and we make that illegal. So if through consensual sex and all that other shit, if the person becomes pregnant and they terminate that pregnancy, they killed that person, right? They should be, and in our world, again, they should be held legally responsible for killing that person. Do you understand that?
I mean, I would disagree with the legal and
I
philosophical.
understand you disagree, but you understand.
Well, sure, they would be in that world.
It's
in that
really
dumb
weird to me
world,
that
That's
it goes
why
on
I'm-
politics.
That's why I'm saying. That's why I'm saying that your analogous is disanalogous, because in your scenario, even if I don't do anything in your scenario, if I don't do anything and they die, really because of so the whole
Oh
thing is
yeah,
that your
yeah.
whole thing would be
Streamers, some streamers make a lot of money from donations and subscribers and whatnot. Some do, not all. Yeah, it's yes, Vosh does very well for himself. He has like 440,000 subscribers. Uh, someday, chat. Maybe not. Yeah, I don't think I'll get that far. But um, yeah, that's why people do it. Is you can make a living off of this, and it's nice to have your thoughts and opinions heard, to talk with people, interesting people, and have conversations like this. It's that's why people do it, right?
disanalogous because I didn't really if I can't be held accountable for those actions at all, and I didn't actually then I
So
I'm
this
not
is a
really
really weird switch to, like, he's saying it's the analogy of, like, if you were hooked up to your friend after that car accident or whatever is disanalogous because it's not an example of what the pro-life world would look like, in that if you did disconnect you wouldn't be held legally responsible, but like that's not the point, right? We're talking about ethical considerations and I guess also legal ones, but like the the point of the analogy is that Tyler would have to say that you should be held morally accountable and legally accountable. That's the question. It's so weird that he's like, it's disanalogous because if I answered the question, or because it's disanalogous because you haven't built in what the answer to that question, my answer to that question would be.
at fault for
It's very
killing
weird.
them, right? And when it comes to abortion, again, on the pro-life side, you're responsible for killing them. So your analogy is disanalogous.
Wait,
If you
okay.
can't see that now,
Quick.
then I don't know how to like make this any more simple
Okay,
for you.
wait, let's run this point by point. Okay. So you're driving with your friends, okay? That is the act of sex.
Oh, Vosh,
Driving
real quick,
is sex.
real quick.
Okay.
I just want to for 1 second, and then you can continue. Don't be dodging. We're coming back to that forced pregnancy, but go ahead.
Okay, we're not dodging. Okay, so the driving is analogous to the sex. It's something that you do, and you understand that it carries risks. Every time you drive, you carry the risk of an accident. That's what you're taught. That same with sex. Every time you have sex, assuming one person has sperm and the other person has eggs, you carry the risk. So
Yeah.
that's it. Then you have a car accident which leads in the incapacitation of one of your friends, okay? And that's analogous to the fertilization of an egg. It's something, it's unfortunate if you're not trying to have a kid. It happened. There you go, okay? And you wake up in the hospital, okay? So at this point, morally speaking, these are perfectly analogous situations. You have an entity, your friend, who can only live if they're hooked up to your body. Now, if the doctors at this hospital hooked you up while you were under, you compared that to rape, which is really interesting.
So I think what he meant by that is that this would be less like you were having sex and more like you were raped, as in the analogy, but he never clarifies. And I don't think he pushes back on it much either. So we're just going to take Vosh's interpretation as correct, even though it makes absolutely no sense that Tyler would say or believe that, but he seems to, and he doesn't argue against it. So like, what else can we assume,
to me. Because considering the fact that these are analogous examples, that kind of makes it seem like you think it's unfair or unethical to expect that anybody should be put in a position to have their bodily autonomy sacrificed for the benefit of another's life, even if they're at fault. So even though in this situation you're the reason that friend might die, you think it's unethical for the doctors to hook you up. The only difference in this situation is that in this case, the doctors hook you up, whereas after a pregnancy, it is the natural function of biology which hooks you up.
I think
But
this
if
is
you
the best
think
argument
that's
of the debate, by
unethical,
the way.
if you think that it's unethical that biology puts you on the hook for 9 months for that, as you seem to, because you think it would be unethical if it was done purposefully by a doctor, it thus necessarily follows that the decision to not sacrifice your bodily autonomy for this entity is something which you have a right to do without being criminally penalized, as you do in the example with the car, and as you seem to support, as long as we substitute all of the relevant variables with the car example as opposed to the abortion example. It seems like you agree with me as long as we substitute the nouns.
Okay, so when you're talking about pregnancy, even though that is technically which I don't, you didn't, well, you kind of agree but didn't agree, but we'll go back to it. Even though that it is, or I believe it is, quote unquote, the forcing of a life into being, I don't find that to be a moral negative, right? So, so it is a.
Well, you probably like that doesn't. While that sounds like a concession, it's really not. He probably doesn't think it's a moral negative because he thinks that it's a good thing that a life came into being. But like, but obviously, like forcing you like it's pretty clear that that's not necessarily true, right? Like forcing a life into being could be a negative if that life was like if 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 as you take his heat. Well, I guess he has to say that because like then ending that life would be the bad thing, but like forcing a life into being just to like suffer would be a bad thing, right?
Is a natural human process, not even a human process, just like a eukaryotic process, but is a natural process. I don't consider it to be a moral negative or a moral positive. I just consider it to be a moral neutral. So, so when it comes to this, I'm not getting it, and here's why I'm not getting it. So, I understand.
Notice he didn't
that
engage
you
at all.
analogize, right?
Even though I think
each point.
I do think that was Vosh's best argument of the debate, not just so far, but I think going forward, and it just wasn't engaged with.
But the problem that you're having is that if I don't do it, you're kind of comparing saving someone to not killing them, right? Because in your analogy, I wouldn't be responsible for killing them. I didn't actually kill them, right? I didn't intentionally kill them, right?
Well, not intentionally, but through your actions, you force them in a position of dependence on your body.
Okay, sure. But so you force them into this state of dependency, but you're giving me the option is like, okay, well, if I don't save them, I'm not penalized. I shouldn't be penalized because I'm just not saving them, right? which doesn't really make sense. I mean, I don't know how that would make sense in this.
Incorrectly. Okay. So when you have an abortion, the only reason why we're having this argument, or the only reason why I care about this at all, is because of the bodily autonomy argument. If by some way a person could be pregnant and it had absolutely no effect on them, not financially, not physically, then I wouldn't care. In fact, I would probably think that abortion would be unethical, because in that case, whether or not you've settled the personhood argument, it's not affecting you in any way, shape, or form. Therefore, there's not really like a counterbalance to allowing them to exist long enough to pop into existence somewhere else.
This would be kind of like why, like if in that example I was giving earlier that I couldn't really like find an impact for, where like if technology existed to the point where like from the moment of conception you could go to a doctor and just say, hey, I don't want to be pregnant anymore, and then like instead of an abortion they like put the fetus in an incubator and it will come to term and be fine, and like there are systems in place to make sure it lives the child lives a happy life or whatever. Like clearly we wouldn't have any of this conversation. Like it would be very wrong to have an abortion instead. But of course it's because that's like the bodily autonomy part is why we care about this, as well as like, well, you can't just remove it from your body without it dying, and so we have to discuss this. That's why it matters. But it's kind of
the
similar.
fact of the matter is that abortion does carry with it consequences to the people who are carrying a baby. So in your example, or I'm sorry, in your contention, the only difference is who's hooking you up to the one dependent on you. And that was just, it's interesting to me.
Well, because that's not the only thing. That's not the only thing.
Well, does the doctor do it? Does. Why is the doctor hooking you up unethical?
Hold on, let me answer your question. So if somebody forces me to be hooked up to another person, I would consider that just like more analogous to rape.
Why?
Right. So like through no.
So remember in the analogy, hooking your dying friend up to you is the equivalent of the biological process that causes a fetus to begin gestation. That's the analogy here. So when he's analogizing that to rape, it seems to be in stark contrast to his stated position. It's really weird that he says this, but he does repeatedly.
Well, through no actions. Well, I guess now that I'm breaking this down, so I'm like talking out loud while I'm talking to you. So, or thinking out loud while I'm talking to you. So, in this, if you did something to actually put yourself in that position, then I guess it's like it's like muddy waters. It's not really that analogous again. And the reason why it's not, and it almost is. I'm not saying that it's completely disanalogous. I am not saying that. I'm not even saying that you're operating under intentional dishonesty or intellectual dishonesty. I'm just saying that it's not how it should be because the issue that you're going to run into again is, are you or should you be at fault for killing that person, or for killing that person? You just keep equating, well, not saving them is, it's not the same as not killing them.
Well,
Or,
why
yeah,
is it
not the
rape
same.
for the doctor to hook you up?
I would rescind that. So
And this is where another instance where it becomes really difficult to find analogies because there aren't other circumstances normally uh, where a where someone can be dependent on you on a bodily way without the intentional action of somebody. Whereas with pregnancy, it's just a biological function. It's not. There's no intentionality or direct action intended to cause that. Like the closest is actually having sex, but obviously like that's not exactly correct because most sex does not result in pregnancy, as it turns out.
I would say if just a doctor hooked you up, I was thinking based off of the fact that, okay, so if a doctor hooked you up to somebody else, and that person like isn't there of any fault of your own, then it would be more so like rape. But so I would rescind that just because you didn't put that part there.
Okay, sure, but say it's your car accident. You got your friend hurt. The doctor hooks you up while you're still under. Like the friend of yours is in a bad state. You just got knocked up the head,
Mhm.
so you're unconscious. You wake up, there's tubes, and there's tubes in them. Is that rape or is that ethical?
Say it again. I'm so sorry.
So in the situation where you're at fault for this person's injury and you're the only
Yeah.
one who can save them, and the doctor hooks you up to them while you're under, do you think that's unethical for the doctor to do that, to connect you?
For the doctor to hook me up.
Yeah, like the doctor's like, oh shit, this guy's gonna
Tubes,
die.
yeah.
unless we start pumping blood into
God damn it, tubes. Listen, I'm tubeless. I don't address tubes. All right, Amazon Kane. If you're not familiar, I would recommend George Carlin has a bit where he talks about tubes. It's more accurately he's talking about like common phrases you'll hear, and one of them is "country's going down the tubes." What tubes? It's very good. Go watch it.
and stat. They hook
Sure,
you up.
absolutely. Yeah, I don't believe you should do that the same way that when you're talking about pro-life, we're not saying that the state or government should hold you down or force you to do this. It's like you totally have a choice. On the pro-life side, you still have a choice. You just have consequences for those choices. On the pro-choice side,
So this I think is actually extremely dishonest, and he comes back to say this. It doesn't get that much pushback, but like no, a pro-life world does not give you choice. It's just like if you get the abortion, there are consequences. In a pro-life world, abortion would be inaccessible. So it's not just like you can go get one, but you'll like once you leave, you just go to jail or whatever. But even if it were like that, that is an imposition of the state basically disallow, or that is saying you in a sense don't have the choice, right? It is applying a coercive element to the other towards one of the options, saying that if you do, like, basically trying to incentivize you not do this because you will be punished. It's kind of like saying in a anti-murder world like we live in now, you can still murder, you just get penalized for it. Well, the whole point is that we try to make sure the murders don't happen. Partially, one of the ways that we do that is through its illegality, and like there will be punishments and people try to prevent it, and it is not something that you're just allowed to do and is easily accessible as a thing to do. Like no, this is dishonest to the point of what I would call a lie. But part of what surrounds this debate as well is the propaganda war. Even the sides are called pro-choice and pro-life are propagandistic phrases, right? Like the idea of saying I'm pro-choice is to say like, well, it's not that I want to kill children, as anti-abortion people will say. It's that I just think it's good to have choice. And on the other side, the pro-lifers, as it were, are it's not that I want to force pregnancy or that I want abortion to be illegal. It's just I'm pro-life. It's all propagandistic, and this is another instance of that. But this is dishonest in a way that it was surprising to me when I first heard it. It was
I was surprised. Like I'm unaccustomed to seeing that level of dishonesty, even in this type of discussion.
You don't have consequences for those choices, at least not legal ones. So, like, yeah, so it's the same thing. It's like, look, you could kill someone. Sure, you could absolutely go out and kill someone, but you will have consequences for this. It's the same.
Yeah,
thing
that's not. No, that's not. Sure, you could. No, not really.
It's your fault the guy's there. They're gonna die without you.
Sure, and again, this is why I'm saying it's not analogous, is because to make it analogous with abortion, if you are arguing in good faith against the pro-life side, you would say that there would have to be consequences. You are responsible for their death. You killed them, and you are trying to put some special parameter where, like, some illogical parameter where you say, well, no, it's you're not going to be charged because you didn't actually.
Yeah, I'm similarly confused as Vosh's face is indicating he is. I don't know what he's going on about. It seems like he's saying, like, this analogy doesn't work because you haven't already built in my assumptions about how the world should be about it. But it's like, but the analogy is to ask you what your to ask you what your assumptions about the world are and how it should look and whatever. It's really, really weird. I don't know what he's going on about.
Well, in abortion, we believe that it is.
I'm not talking about charges or anything like that. I'm just saying, why would it be unethical for the doctor to hook you up? Isn't the doctor doing God's work? If you have sex,
I don't
and
believe
you
in
have,
God, so I don't know what you're talking about.
If you have sex and nature's work, if you have sex and the pregnancy takes place, then by natural biological forces, the life of that zygote is attached to the womb. But it is because you had sex that zygote
doctor isn't
is there.
natural forces, Wash.
Well, yeah, but
right, but like this is where it's like
unethical
it's just hard to find an analogy. Like the like. To get caught up on that is to avoid the question being asked. This is where, like, I feel like Tyler gets really dodgy, because he's like trying to say, like, oh, it's not perfectly analogous. Like yeah, it's hard to. There aren't any other situations where someone will be obligated to. Someone will be dependent on your body without someone's intentional intervention. But what we're trying to get to is the principle once we get past that point.
For a human to do the work that a natural force would otherwise do.
So wait a minute. Are you legitimately trying to compare the natural forces that you just talked about versus a doctor who consciously made the decision to hook you up to someone?
Well, I'm asking you because in both cases, it's your fault why this life is dependent on you, and you're the only one who can save them. So why should the doctor not do what your womb would otherwise and hook you up?
Again. You shouldn't be. No one should sacrifice, their bodily autonomy for that, right?
But you're saying it's not analogous because he arbitrarily adding legal clause. Yeah, it's really weird. Like I said, he gets really dodgy here, and it doesn't make any sense. But the whole debate is about whether there should be. Yeah, exactly. He's like, yeah, because he's. Yeah, it's really weird.
If you are saying, again...
I agree, Peachy Keen. It doesn't make any sense to me either.
That you are not responsible for killing of that person, then absolutely not. Even if you were responsible for killing of that person...
You drove the car. It's your bad driving.
Okay, but if they die, are you responsible for killing them?
No.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. You're putting the special parameters that have nothing to do with abortion.
No. See, that question was like, Vosh was answering. He's like, I don't think I don't think you're responsible, but you should have to think you're responsible. Yeah.
When it comes to abortion, Vosh,
we're just
please operate on good faith. Please operate on good faith.
No, nothing about this is bad faith. I need you to understand that these are completely analogous examples.
They're not. You saying that over and over again to gaslight your own.
That's not
audience.
what gaslighting means. What is disanalogous here? Is it your fault that the person needs your life to survive?
Is it your fault that the person needs your life to survive?
In this example that I have provided, in this analogy.
Yes, clearly, right?
Is it your fault that they need your life?
Like you drove. It's your bad driving. That's the reason why there was an accident.
Okay, so if it's my bad driving, why am I not going to be charged for the killing of them?
Okay, so you think right? So he's asking why haven't you built into the analogy what my answer will be, which is like, well, okay, so you're saying that you should be charged. Oh no, you're saying no. He's asking if why is he bad for being charged for the bad driving, because driving poorly isn't illegal necessarily, and for what it's worth, the analogy there is in the analogy the bad driving is equivalent to sex, maybe irresponsible sex, but like. Sex isn't illegal, nor should it be, so we're trying to get past that part.
Well, to drive poorly. Plenty of people get in car accidents that tragically lead to the death of their children or their partners or their friends without getting charged. Like, that's just part of life. It's unfortunate, but it happens.
What happened? Okay, but what happened? Why? It's important. The distinction is important.
You drive poorly. You just drove poorly. You reacted poorly to some other car, like changing lanes really quickly in front of you, and you pivoted off into a light stand, and you hit. it's
You-
poor
you hit a-
driving, but it's not illegal.
Okay.
You're not going to be charged.
Okay, you're not gonna. Right. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, so it's your fault.
Wow,
I
the
mean,
government
if you've been a better
should
driver,
just make getting in
you-
car accidents
you
illegal.
wouldn't
You know,
get-
you
if
know
you've
what?
done
Maybe
better,
you're onto something.
your
That
friend
would
wouldn't
solve
be in
it.
that
Yeah, you're
position.
right. Yeah.
It's your fault.
There you go.
You wake up and you're hooked up
Yeah.
to your friend. who's
we
dying.
solved it,
Why?
guys.
Why
We've
is
solved
have
it,
to go to
friends.
the doctor to do that.
Well, the same way, just because you do. Okay, so everything that is that would be your, I guess you would say your fault or the reason why they are there, doesn't mean that it should also translate to legality, right? Not everything.
Well, in this world, in America today, you wouldn't be held legally responsible. And in America
No,
today,
but
you
we're
could
not
have an
talking about what
abortion.
is legal. Yeah, but we're not talking about what is legal. We're talking about what should be legal, right?
Well, no, I'm talking about ethically. Why is it wrong for the doctor to hook you up?
Well, why would it be right? I'm not understanding. here.
Because it was your fault that your friend is about to die and you're the only one who can save them.
Okay, again, you are so you're proving my point, right? So, like I said, choosing to save someone isn't the same as killing them, Bosch, or choosing
that-
not to kill them.
That's
So while he says that, remember, he does not understand that abortion is closer to choosing not to save someone than it is to killing them. But that's also part of the like dishonesty that comes with the anti-abortion side is like they put these like really extreme, it's killing them because they want you to get like emotionally upset about what the thing is, but like no, it's more accurately letting them die, you know?
I argue. Okay, wait. Actually, I have a different hypothetical. Hold on. Wait, this is a little wacky,
Okay.
but I'm genuinely curious. Okay, if humans were reptiles, I know this sounds dumb, but please follow through with me here. Okay, so the way,
Yeah.
okay. So the way humans work is that we incubate living things in our wombs and then we poop them out, basically. Okay. If instead we were reptiles, when we fertilize eggs, we lay those eggs and then have to take care of those eggs in order for them to hatch. You got to sit them for a couple months. Do you think it would be unethical for humans to have sex, to fertilize eggs, to plop those eggs out, and then to just fucking ditch them? Like inside, you got little human zygote things.
Okay,
They're
so
in
hold
eggs.
on. So hold on. I don't know why we're talking about.
I do think this
reptilian
analogy
people,
is
but
pretty
okay.
good.
So you're saying.
Just to make Amazon Kane happy in chat, this might be more analogous if humans were birds, maybe like chickens, because I don't think reptiles necessarily have to incubate their eggs or like have to sit on them, but I mean chickens clearly do. So it's just like if humans were chickens, you know.
Saying that if we were reptiles, I'm gonna grant you this. You're saying that if we were reptiles, and what happens now?
Do you think it would be unethical to lay
Mhm.
fertilized eggs as a reptile, as a female reptile, I guess, and then to just abandon those eggs, knowing that there are little zygotes inside of them that are biologically identical to what a human woman would carry in their womb now? Would it be okay to leave those eggs, not warm them, they die and rot on their own?
So you're like own children essentially.
Yeah, they're your kids. You have sex, you don't want to have kids, so you just like leave the eggs to rot somewhere behind a dumpster. Do you think
Okay,
that would be ethical?
so what you would equate that? Okay, but I'm not trying to talk about reptilians. I'm trying to bring this over. But I'm gonna.
Yeah,
answer
he's
this.
not
I'm gonna answer
engaging,
this,
but it is a
but I'm
good
just thinking it
example,
through
a
in my
good
head.
analogy.
So okay, so would we say that this is the same as a mother who has a child who leaves their kid out to starve and doesn't do anything for them? They just don't.
No,
want to be
this would
bothered
be
with
the
them?
Well, no, 'cause
equivalent
that-
of removing the fetus from the womb and then just letting what happens. That's what an abortion is removing the fetus from the womb. It ends up being lethal because it requires because the fetus requires the nutrients of the womb and to basically feed off of its host, to use very loaded language, in order to survive. But ultimately, it's not like they don't like take the fetus out of the womb and then like snap its neck or whatever, or like it just dies because it's like. I mean, I don't think they could go out of their way to kill it, but like if that's the difference, right, we can just leave it out, you know.
At that point, they've already given birth to the kid. In this case, I'm testing your hypothetical. I'm testing your moral
Well,
consistency.
what does it matter?
Because you just said there's a difference
Sure,
between
sure.
killing a fetus and
Sure.
not attaching yourself to sustain the life of somebody who requires you to live. Those eggs are detached from you. You can walk away if you want, but they need your continued support in order to live. Is it okay to walk away from them?
So for one, I would just say that it wouldn't matter just because. No. So it is not okay for you to walk away from your if that is what I believe to be a person, right? It is not okay for you to walk away from the person. That
Okay,
you
now we're finally
also
getting
created. Now, when
somewhere.
we're talking about
He thinks it would be wrong if instead of sitting on your eggs that are fertilized, you got up and walked away. And I think that is unconscionable. But now we've finally gotten somewhere. Now it's clear, like, okay, so you don't give a shit about bodily autonomy, which I guess is where we've gotten to. Like I guess he hasn't conceded on anything. It's just so much of like that is kind of nightmarish.
Like your own child specifically, there are.
That's
I
why
don't know
Vosh
if
is
you agree
excited
with this,
here. You can
tell
see
me
his
if you do
giddy.
or
He's
you
like,
don't.
let's go, let's go.
There's
get in
also
there.
a difference between someone else versus your own children, right? So you have I believe you have a
I don't
moral
know why that makes a
responsibility,
difference.
but also currently you do have a legal responsibility to provide at least food and shelter for your kids.
Oh, that's actually a really interesting one. I just thought of another example that I'm not even sure if it gets to anything, but it is really interesting to me at the very least. So I'll share it. It's basically like, let's say you're someone who has a womb, and you have a friend who is pregnant, right now with a fetus that they wanted, let's say, and then that friend, something happens to them. Maybe like they get into an accident, like they were walking around, like maybe they were just like walking around near their house, and like a boulder fell on them out of nowhere. I don't know. They got crushed by an anvil, whatever. But the fetus was unharmed. Your friend is dead now, like, and you have limited time, but the fetus will die if it's not like transplanted into another womb, and we have the technology. We can do this now. And the doctors tell you like, hey, you're the only one who can do this. Would you like agree to having that child transplanted into your womb? Do you have a right to say no? Now, the difference, of course, that pro-lifers will say is like, well, you didn't do anything that would cause this event to occur. I don't think that very much matters, in part because people like with unintended pregnancies, often they're not trying to get pregnant, and are often trying not to. Maybe that matters a little bit in your mind. I don't think it does very much, but if it, like, I think it would be extremely reasonable to say I don't want to carry this fetus. I think a person would have a right to refuse that situation. And this would be like kind of analogous, I think. Well, it's similar, right? Like at the very least, it's a situation where you are refusing to allow this like being to attach itself to you on the basis of your bodily autonomy, and it will die without you. Which I guess the pro-lifer position is also like, no, because you're killing it with an abortion, not letting it die. Even though I think that is less accurate.
Cannot neglect them.
I don't know. It's just an interesting idea.
Sure, but
I wasn't
again,
sure if it would go on.
we're talking about like persons, right? I believe it to be a person. You keep every time I keep equating this to a person, you keep saying, "Oh, well, but a born." You've already said in the very beginning that you're going to talk about this as if it is a person.
Didn't you just say we have a legal obligation? If you just said obligation, then I would argue we absolutely do not have an obligation to these fetuses, which is why we can abort them.
Sure. What I'm saying is that you have a moral. I believe you to have a moral obligation, but also yes, you currently do have a legal obligation, and I'm saying that I agree with that. But I believe also because that is a person, or what I believe to be a person, that it should be extended to the legal system. Does that make sense?
Yes, I understand that. However, you said you could walk away from those eggs, knowing that those are essentially little fetuses.
No, I did not say that.
No, you said you could. Okay. Yeah, that you would have.
So
you would not
take care
be
of them, even though they're detached from your body, and it takes sustained effort on your part in order to do so.
Your children, sure.
Okay, so how is that any different from the example where you're the person who got in a car accident? In that incident, now you aren't hooked up directly the way that a fetus is to a womb. Yeah. External effort has to be exerted in order to maintain your bodily autonomy being suppressed to their livelihood. In this case, it would be doctors connecting you via wire or via tubes. In the egg case, it would be, I don't know, sitting on them, whatever it takes. How are these disanalogous?
Again, because in your analogy, you put the parameter that if you don't do, you are not responsible for killing that person. You're saying that you didn't. Again, if you're talking about this when you're...
And now we're back to like, it's disanalogous because you haven't already assumed my answer. But he's like, no, I'm asking you. I'm asking you if you think there should be a requirement.
Talking about these reptilian people, then I would say you are, in this analogy, you are responsible
Summary of this debate. Your analogy makes my position so it's not analogous. Well, in the last 20 minutes or so, definitely.
In my case,
later it's like, hey, let's run in circles for a while.
Right to walk away from your friend.
Yeah,
you have right to walk away from those eggs. But what's the difference?
Though part of it was just like even trying to find a good analogy, which they struggled with for a while.
Eggs or something.
But it's hard. It's hard to find a good
sacrifice
analogy.
Your bodily autonomy for, but the person isn't.
Yeah. Then I would just say that again, like if you are not, I guess I don't know another way to say what I've said a couple of times already.
So in both instances, you have, through your own fault, you've produced an entity which is dependent on you to survive, and you must exert effort in order to sustain their life at the cost of your bodily autonomy. For an egg, it's sitting on it, and for your friend, it's tubes running your blood through to them. Does the state have the right to criminally penalize you for not doing those things?
No. Well, if you're talking about your in your scenario of not the reptilian people, the other thing, then absolutely not.
Wait, what's the difference? Wait, in both cases, how can you differentiate between the two?
Sure. So again, so if somebody, and I'm gonna kind of say this out loud as I think about it. So okay, so in your scenario, again,
he keeps saying again for things that he actually hasn't said before, and it's really obnoxious to me. I don't know if it's bothered anyone else. It's just one of those like I don't know. It's just really annoying to me. Of like, no, I keep pressing you on this because you haven't answered it, and then every time you answer, you say, well, again, non-answer. You know?
Through fault of my own, this person is going to be in a state, or they are going to die if it isn't for me.
Yeah.
Okay, so they are going to die if it isn't for me. Now, if I allow them to hook themselves up to me through this and violate my bodily autonomy, then they do not die.
Yes, they will live, presumably, if you do so.
Okay. So in this scenario, if I don't do anything, if I allow them to die, then I did nothing wrong.
From my moral system, I don't think you would have done anything wrong. I think you have a right to preserve your bodily autonomy.
Yeah, so for me, I would say that you absolutely did something wrong.
Okay,
so,
finally gotten somewhere.
Do you think the state should be able to arrest you?
If you force that person into a state of dependency, and then you remove that dependency, or at least in your analogy, if you force that person into a state of dependency due to fault of your own, then I would say that you killed that person.
But notice how he's rephrasing it, right? Like lots of like really strong languages. If you force someone into a state of dependency, and then then they remove that dependency, like. But what we're talking about is a situation where, like, once you remind yourselves of the specifics, it's a lot less like forcing and cruelty and you're doing something wrong. It's a little like it's just the loaded language that makes it sound wrong. When you go back to the scenario, like, I think it would be absolutely wild to say that you should be obligated to connect your body to this dying person, not just morally, but also legally, because you got into an accident as a bad driver. Like, maybe you would feel bad if you didn't do it because like it's your friend or whatever, but like you should like if someone does refuse, I don't think that should be illegal.
You're responsible for killing that person.
And now he's back to you're responsible for killing that person. Remember, he made the distinction between killing and letting die, but once you bring back the loaded language, now it seems a lot more reasonable to be saying you're killing them. I don't think he actually makes a distinction between killing and letting die, but he has to acknowledge it exists, except anytime he makes arguments, he doesn't factor in that distinction.
Okay, so you believe
again,
that
you can choose. No, I know what you're about to say. No, I've said this already. No, I do not believe that the state should go in there and say that you are forced to do this. I'm saying.
So this is a distinction that Tyler makes exclusively. I haven't seen any other anti-abortion person make this argument, but basically what he's saying is like, no, you shouldn't. The state shouldn't force you to do this. You'll just have consequences if you don't. But in the context of abortion, no, the state is forcing you to continue with your pregnancy because it would not be legal for anyone to provide you with an abortion. It would an abortion would be inaccessible. You would have no choice but to carry the child to term or to do something very illegal. And this is why, like, one of the things that people talk about with abortions and why one of the problems of its illegality is that countries that where abortions are illegal don't have fewer abortions. They just have less safe abortions. Instead of having in a doctor's office, it happens in a hotel room with a coat hanger. There's a lot of problems here, but
saying you have a choice, right? Again, we believe in the choice.
No, you don't believe in the choice. You're lying, right? Like that. At this point, I'm willing to call it a lie. No, you don't believe in the choice. You want to make it like, in your world, it would be impossible to get an abortion, except for like really wacky, really difficult cases in like we'll get to how difficult it would be. No, that choice doesn't meaningfully exist. It's kind of like, do you have the right to like to do fracking? Like, yeah, I guess in a way, but none of us are rich enough where we can act on that right. So meaningfully, we don't have that right.
Choose that choice. So it's like, hey, if you let's say the government,
Or a better example is like, you are allowed to vote. Everybody has the right to vote, but you can only vote in Washington D.C. on election day. You have to like go physically in person there. In a sense, no, you don't. If you're too far, you just don't have the right to vote, and that would be the equivalent.
government comes in, they're like, hey, look, you're responsible for killing this person. Okay, or at least they're going to die because of your actions if you don't sacrifice your bodily autonomy. Okay, so if you do not do this, which you really should feel morally obligated to do anyway, because you're really the reason why they did that. But anyway, so if you do not sacrifice your bodily autonomy for them, they are going to die due to fault of your own, and because you are responsible.
Notice we're
for
back to
them
the
dying,
loaded language.
You should be charged with this. Whereas the same thing when we're talking about abortion. If you abort this child or you don't give up your bodily autonomy, right, and they are there because of you, they're in that state of dependency because of you, then you should be charged. Or,
so do you think you should be charged?
Hold on.
Yeah.
Or if you don't, or I'm sorry, or if you do, give up your bodily autonomy, then you will not be charged with the killing of them because you're not responsible. You did not kill them. Then everything will be fine. Then absolutely, 1,000%.
So you think the state should be able to charge you if you choose not to hook your body up to preserve the life of your friend?
If you are responsible in the killing, if you are responsible in their death, sure.
Okay.
No,
right.
he says if you're responsible in their death. No. If you're the situation isn't you're responsible for their death. You're responsible for their condition that requires you. But he wants to put again. It's the loaded terms.
You've bitten the bullet.
He keeps going back to that.
I think that's insane.
Why do you think that's insane?
The legal consequences of the state being able to charge people for not sacrificing their bodily autonomy to preserve the lives of others are enormous.
Hold on. Not just the lives of others. Don't generalize it. You force that person there, right? You are responsible for their death.
Sure.
I love how he's like, don't generalize it, but do let me use all this like crazy loaded terminology.
But to be frank, the biggest leap there was the sacrifice of the bodily autonomy. The who it's for and why it's for are comparatively pithy arguments.
That said, once we got here, we're at an impasse. We're never gonna like. There's just no argument you can really make. Like maybe you could try to make arguments of like why that, like maybe you could, because he thinks it's a highly specific case, and it'd be hard to find an analogy of where like you like. If even in this case, in this analogy, he thinks you should be required to hook up, there's not gonna be an analogy you're gonna find where he's gonna understand why it's harmful for people's bodily autonomy to be conditional.
You can sacrifice the bodily autonomy of an individual to save those for whom they're responsible. You can go much farther than that with very, very, very few changes to the premise. Why do you have to be responsible for that person? Does convenience...
Like, here's maybe an example you could use is like, let's say you're a parent intentionally wanting to have a child, all this other stuff. Your kid is like growing up or whatever, and at some point, probably before they're 18, so he's still like they're your kid or whatever, like they get very ill. It turns out it's a genetic illness. It's just one that like it didn't affect you, but it runs in it, but it's definitely because of your genes or whatever. And like if they don't get their internal organs are failing, and if they don't get a heart transplant from you, they will die. Right? Don't you have to sacrifice your bodily autonomy to like give? They're only there because of you. You forced them to exist and forced them to have this genetic code that caused this problem, and only you can save them. Like, I think it would be pretty clear that like, no, the state shouldn't force you to do that or penalize you if you don't give up your heart for that. Right? Like, that would be completely unreasonable. I don't know. He might bite the bullet and say, "Yeah, you should have to do that." But that, like, this example is why it is intended to illustrate why what Tyler just said is insane.
not outweigh, or does life not outweigh convenience in all instances? You could start seeing situations where people start getting their organs harvested for the necessity of the state so they can distribute it to a proportionally greater number of people. This is a very dangerous legal road, and it is the reason...
How would you do that?
There are many ways why and how that
just
can
explain it to me.
Like an easy one is every time you're in a car accident where someone's injured, like that you would have to give up what, like if they need any, like if they need a blood transfusion, it has to come from you. If they need an organ transplant, it comes from you or whatever. Like that's the easy one. But the example I gave, I think, is more poignant.
The specific example that I just provided?
Yeah. No, you're talking about like harvesting like organs.
Because at that point we fall down a sort of like naked utilitarian trap, where at this point the state has carte blanche permission to sacrifice the bodily autonomy.
So this is where we got back to like the political stuff. It might not be like, it's just one of those like, there are ramifications of the precedent, but that, like, obviously Tyler would disagree with like the extrapolations.
If they believe doing so could save more lives. But then you get like death panel shit. You get forced organ harvesting. You get like forced recruitment into the military. Everything that I'm describing right now follows like necessarily from the belief that you can sacrifice an individual's bodily autonomy.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
I think these are very, very close to each other, like morally and ethically.
No, can I respond to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say absolutely not. So if you are talking about someone harvesting your organs and you keep saying sacrifice, it's like, well, no. Like, I mean, if you want to say sacrifice, if by what you mean by sacrifice is that you have a choice, like, look, you put this person there, you are responsible, what you did is going to end up with killing that person. And they are only in that position because of you, right? They are only there because of you. Right. Also, like in your analogy, like they kind of made that conscious decision to come into your car.
Why does it
even
have to
knowing
be
that
somebody who's there because of you? How far does that go?
That was
by
your
the way?
analogy. That was your analogy.
What about a CEO who like fires people and then those people go hungry or starve? How far do we go with this?
What did you say? I'm sorry.
What if a CEO fires people?
Yeah,
and those
right, like,
people go hungry,
and what,
jobless,
like they're
or
forced into that
starved?
position by this
How far
person,
do we
right?
go with this? Where does the line of moral responsibility end? Who's responsible for who?
Well, I wouldn't say that you are directly responsible for that. Also, there was like a contractual.
You're
that you
pretty
had, right?
directly
Yeah,
responsible
but
for that.
in
Okay, so if you, but also to be fair, I do believe that you should be able to fire anybody just for about anything.
Well, right, because you believe in autonomy when it comes to preserving corporate rights, but not when it comes to preserving like bodily rights.
No, what I'm saying is it's not even bodily rights. You're totally strawmanning my argument. But what I'm saying is that I'm saying that if you're talking about a CEO, first you have that contractual agreement that you cannot do whatever or whatever. Even though I personally believe that you could fire somebody for whatever, we still do have that currently in law. I don't see that going away either. We still do have that currently in law that you can't do that. But even if you didn't, it is what it is. But again, that would more so be like you indirectly contributed to that. But then you could also argue, it's like, well, if this
Now the
person didn't
vagueness
do
is,
X, Y, and
I don't
Z,
even know what he's been saying for the last couple minutes. Like, it's been so vague. I don't even know what he's saying.
then they would have whatever. Again, we'd have to like really boil that like scenario down to like a very, very specific
there are a
example.
million arguments that I could make. Now, I would take me some time to, but I guarantee you, if you gave me a day, I could think of an extrapolation of the argument you made to inflict a significant amount of harm on what we consider.
Yeah,
to
it
be
would take a little
peaceful
time.
society.
Sure. I guarantee you that if you made that argument in a day, that I would just respond to that video and we can come back.
It wouldn't be responding to
whatever.
that video. It would just be those are the ethical consequences, the extrapolations that one would make from the belief that yes, the state can force you to sacrifice your bodily autonomy for another person's life, even
Can
if
you
you're
make an example
responsible.
now?
I
Well,
would
it
have
takes some
think
time
about
to
it
think,
of some
come up
perfectly
with. Like,
analogous
I came up with one,
then
but I've
you have to
already
wonder,
seen this
what does
debate.
it mean to
You
be
know?
directly responsible for? After all, was the car driver really directly responsible for it? Wasn't it the person who like quickly changed lanes directly in front of them? What about direct responsibility with regards to firearm sales by corporations? What about direct responsibility with regards to opiate sales? What about advertisements that lead to an increase in the number of people who die from smoking or from sugar or from fat or from any of the other innumerable things that harm society?
Right, so if you right, I get that. So what I'm saying is that if you directly do something that would force that person into a state of dependency, that's kind of where I draw the line. So like I could give you a scenario. Now this isn't completely analogous to abortion, but it's just the forced dependency that I'm talking about. So like say that.
And again, he's back to forced dependency, as though that's accurate to what like as though that's been like agreed to, but like Bosch has pushed back on it. It's not forced dependency, right? And I don't agree that that's an accurate way of describing pregnancy.
Had like a drug that nobody else had. Say it's from fucking planet Krypton or some shit. I have this drug. I'm the only one who has it. Nobody else can get it. And I inject you with this serum or this poison or whatever, this drug, and then that force, that dependency. You are now forced on me to give you this drug, to keep supplying you with this drug. If I die, you die. You don't know where it is. You can't force it out of me. Now I'm the only person who has it. Now, if I and say that it was going to be like that for a certain period of time, right? Now, say that after a couple days, you're like, yeah, you know what? I ain't feeling this shit. So I'm no longer going to provide this drug to you. And I stop giving you this drug, and then you die because of it. I am directly.
All right. Can anyone guess what the problem is with this analogy? We should have the tools now to figure it out. I'll wait a second, though. I don't imagine people are paying enough attention to necessarily respond quick enough. So the problem is that the act that was wrong there was injecting the person in the first place. But in the analogy, that is the act of sex or conception, but that's not illegal, nor should it be, and that is the only. And that's the what he's talking about is like the forced dependency, but that is not an accurate description of how pregnancy occurs. In part because when people have sex, they have a reasonable belief that they will not become pregnant, otherwise they wouldn't be doing it, right? And again, contraceptives contribute to that. This should be closer to if you gave me a tour of your factory for this place, realizing that like most of the time people don't it's fine, people come through and I like trip, fall over the guardrail and fall into a vat of this stuff, and now I have to provide it forever. Now I have to be provided it forever or whatever. You didn't really do anything wrong there. Maybe it'd be a little messed up if you had to like if you denied it, but maybe it's one of those like, well, this person can like pay for this drug for the rest of his life, but they demand it for free, and you say, well, maybe not. That would be, and because like it's crazy expensive or something, like, you know, giving it to them for free might like bankrupt you or something. Like even if it didn't, the point is like what they're demanding from you is kind of unreasonable, given that like this was an instance of it's closer to their fault than yours. It's closer to the fetus doing something than you doing something in a way.
Responsible for you dying. I murdered you 1,000%. I mean, you should be able to agree with that, right?
Sure. What about anti-maskers?
What about them?
Should the state be able to criminalize anti-maskers who don't provide whatever portion of their income is necessary to subsidize the medical needs of those around them who get COVID-19?
Or like anti-vaxxers, as we were talking about recently, who like causing measles epidemic. Like, you know, if your kid gets measles because you didn't vaccinate them, are you like on the like? Well, I would argue that's probably child abuse, but like should like but like anti-vaxxers who like, well, I'll be fine, I'm just won't get the thing, but then they infect all the people whose immune systems are so weak that they can't get vaccinated and they couldn't protect themselves. Like maybe they should be my argument is like they should be required to be vaccinated, but not that they should be required to like do whatever like blood transfusions and transplants and whatever and like for these people that they might need because your bodily autonomy supersedes that, right?
But you're talking about like I would have to wear a mask due to the government telling me that I have to wear a mask to help protect someone else?
No, not just that you would have to wear a mask, but if you didn't wear a mask and somebody around you got sick, the government would like mandate that a stipend of your wages would be provided.
How would they know that I'm the person who got them sick?
If you live with a person or you co-work with a person, or you can use vector tracing, or like there are ways to determine with reasonable certainty.
Well, the only way to get there, well, reasonable certainty versus actual certainty for a mother aborting her kid. But okay, so first of all, you'd have to go through a lot of steps here. So for one, you'd have to prove that I definitively did that. And the only way to definitively do that is the government would then have to also step in and force people to take tests, to mandatory to say, look, you have COVID or whatever, which I think that, I don't know what your thoughts are on that. Do you think that that's ethical, that we should allow the government to do that?
But he also
Under
doesn't take your
system,
position.
I think that would be necessary because it would be the only way to allow contact tracing to determine who's responsible for infecting who. You're the one who wants state involvement in medical care. Like you're the one who wants like the state to like overlook everything. I don't. So
No, I don't want the state to overlook everything. I want the state to make sure, or to have a law that we cannot kill each other.
well,
Right,
the
or
state.
kill-
Well,
we
yeah,
do
we,
have that
we
law
do have that
currently.
law, but remember, we're back to, oh, it's killing, you know?
What you're looking to do is criminalize people who decide not to sacrifice their bodily autonomy to preserve the lives of those who are harmed or at threat because of their actions. But you can extrapolate that really, really far. Now we could well, hold on, because we've been at it for an hour. I just want to say we can run down that forever, like that, like line. I just want to say, as a libertarian, that I cannot conscionably like allow the state to have that degree of involvement in people's rights. I think that bodily autonomy is virtually sacred. I think that it's one of the very few things that we should absolutely and unambiguously defend under any context. And I think
you don't believe that.
Sure, I do. With the exception of some like contractual sacrifices.
No, I already gave you like analogies that you said. Well, no, you absolutely. I gave you the skydiving.
Gotta go.
analogy.
This is
I
much better
absolutely
debate.
had
At
an
least Phil
analogy.
says
Bodily autonomy,
even though I
saying that I
disagree.
won't
Yeah,
kill you
like,
and then
yeah.
killing
Well,
the
thanks
person
for
isn't
thanks for
bodily
watching. I
autonomy.
mean, I think it devolves past here. I'm honestly like getting to the end of my rope as far as what I want to watch here. There's some stuff later that I thought was interesting, but I'll just leave it to y'all to watch it. I'll go into like 5 or something like that. But yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it, PG Keen. I'll catch you next time.
Okay. So you're saying, so even in your own analogy where you were talking about, oh well, you know, if you're hanging off of this cliff or whatever, and I said, okay, if you, and this is how we got into the force thing, so don't forget about that. So when you were like, well, that was a contractual agreement. We agreed that I was going to hang this person over the edge, and I was like, okay, so what if you force that person over the edge? You force them into that state of dependency. Okay, exactly. So,
Yeah,
so
No,
what I'm
because
saying
like his
is that
analogy
you
is
literally
failed
just
'cause-
pushing a person over a cliff.
Let me, Bosch, can I finish my thought here?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
And remember, in this analogy, pushing over the cliff would be analogous to having sex, right? Like like that's what he's trying to say. But like obviously, the moral culpability there is nowhere near it's like nowhere near the same.
So what I said was that, Vosh, if you force this person over the edge and then
And I think that analogy demonstrates very clearly why forced dependence is an inaccurate description of what's going on. Because to equivocate, you had sex and got and therefore became pregnant is the same thing as you push someone over a ledge and now both the fetus and that person pushed over the ledge are dependent on you. Those are clearly very different morally.
you said, like, almost without hesitation, you were like, absolutely, you should be charged because you forced that person into that state of dependency, and then you remove that dependency, and then they died because of it, right? That is how. Well, go ahead. Well, I want to make sure I'm not strawmanning you.
A pregnancy and abortion are even remotely comparable to like directly murdering a person.
I'm talking about forcing someone into a state of dependency on your bodily autonomy.
These aren't bodily autonomy.
And you're not forcing someone into, but like he doesn't push back on it. It's going to drive me insane because he doesn't push back. It's not forcing someone into a state of dependency.
Or if someone is hanging off of a cliff or the edge of a rooftop or whatever,
because you know how distant these ideas are.
No, you just don't.
Finally, some pushback on the language.
You know that you're fucking wrong. That
no,
it's
not bodily autonomy. Wait, this is like saying like if you point a gun at a person, it's a violation of bodily autonomy to force them to not pull the trigger. Like this isn't a matter of bodily autonomy.
What is bodily autonomy?
But with regards to like the
so this is where, like I said before, and we're going to get into it a lot here. I would make a distinction between autonomy and bodily autonomy in the sense that it is like your autonomy as far as your actions and what you choose to do is you have it's possible to have more restrictions on than your bodily autonomy, basically your right to yourself and like things like expulsion from your body or attachment to your like or access to your body. Those are things you should have almost exclusive rights to. Like there might be some examples you can think of where like maybe you can like you can be asked to sacrifice of your bodily autonomy and that would be reasonable, but like that is not the same thing as being required or not required to engage in or abstain from a particular action. Though he would argue like abortion is that action, but then we see, but like the reason why you have a right to that action is because your bodily autonomy is sacrificed otherwise.
Philosophical.
It's a conflict between action and autonomy.
Bodily autonomy is like the preservation of an individual's right to do what they want to with their body, insofar as it doesn't violate the rights of others.
Okay, so tell me how if someone is holding onto my arm, or I'm holding onto them actually, and I am holding them off of an edge, are you telling me that has nothing to do with bodily autonomy, even though they are completely dependent on my body?
Oh, and
No.
by the way, we see in movies all the time that this kind of situation and understand the moral uncertainty and like the understanding there of like someone is like falling and they catch onto you, but you'll both die if they hold on. So they like usually it's the person who's like dangling who cuts themselves free, but we understand that like the harm to the other the person dangling um might be necessary for the preservation of the person who's secured, you know.
That's really not a bodily autonomy issue.
How
Again,
is
like
it not?
if I pointed a gun at you and then you were
No,
like, dude, don't
stop
pull.
going into other analogies.
No, but this is how dumb it sounds. If I point a gun at
Yeah, and Tyler gets really annoyed at other analogies, but these analogies are to explain why his analogy fails, so like I don't know what to tell you.
you and you're like, dude, don't pull the trigger, and I'm like, you don't have any right over my bodily autonomy, and then I pull the trigger, like that's not a
That's
bodily.
not the same. That's not the same thing at all. Because
It's
I'm
not
not
a bodily
dependent-
autonomy
that
issue.
person. No, it is exactly. That's not a bodily autonomy issue because you're not dependent on that person's body for survival. In
You're
this
dependent on me
analogy,
not
bro,
pulling
you
the
are
trigger.
operating in such bad faith. So hold on. So you're saying that if somebody is hanging,
It's really
if I am
not bad.
holding someone over the edge of a cliff, that is not any way, shape, or form related to bodily autonomy, even though that person right there is completely reliant on my body for survival. But you can't actually articulate how it's not.
What if the gun had a reverse trigger? So when
Fuck the gun.
when I point the gun at
Talk
you,
about what I'm talking about.
Wait,
Please
no, this
engage
is
with
per-
what
wait,
I'm
wait,
This
saying.
perfect
analogy is
hold
actually
on.
pretty
What if
good.
the gun has a
Bro,
reverse
you
trigger?
can't even talk about my analogy. You can't even tell me how it's not. How
It's
it's
the
this
same
analogy. You can't tell
analogy,
me.
just with the nouns replaced. Okay.
Bro,
If
if it's the same analogy, then go into my analogy. Tell me specifically.
If I point a gun at you, okay, and it
Oh
has a
my
reverse
God.
trigger, so I depress the trigger to prep the
You're worse
mechanism.
than like Victoria Hammett. You're like the most bad faith arguer.
No,
we
hold on.
get
Okay,
into
I
the,
just- I
like,
want you
the
to
cope
get
shit,
behind
but,
this
like-
argument, okay? Because this is how dumb you
I'm not
don't.
getting behind
Wait,
shit.
this is
until
how dumb you
until
sound. Come on, let me.
engage with what I said.
Wait.
Vosh, I have no problem
This
getting
isn't
behind
this isn't bodily autonomy. It's just not. So all I can do is
Okay.
make fun of the absurdity of your example,
here's
and I was
what-
gonna do it in a
so-
funny way. We were gonna have a laugh together.
Hold on. So this is so wait a minute. So you're just appealing to ignorance. You don't know how it is, but you're just
No,
saying.
it's-
Well,
it's
no,
not.
he's trying to
You don't
explain
know
why
how
it
it
is.
is.
Yeah.
Well, is it
This
not?
is like what I mean about
This
it.
isn't
This
a bodily
debate
autonomy
devolves.
issue. This is just
How
murder.
is it not?
Okay,
Oh
can
my
I ask
God.
you a question?
I'm definitely not finishing the
Vosh,
rest of
I
this.
need
you-
We'll see how
wanna
long I feel
know.
like
I wanna
going.
know.
Vosh, please.
He even said Vosh. Like this is the thing I was talking about before in a previous video. I don't understand what it is. Like something about like when someone starts to get mad at Vosh, suddenly like the mechanisms in their brain compel them to pronounce his name differently. It was like, I'm mad at you, so now you're Vosh. Like it seemed even like unintentional, but I don't know why everyone does this. It's like you can see how upset they are by how they pronounce his name. I don't understand what this like weird like there's like some there's some like weird effect on the brain that the word Vosh has, where like when you're really mad at someone with that name, your brain will reconfigure the word so you have to pronounce it wrong. I don't know what the fuck this is about. It always happens, and it's so wild to me. I don't get it.
I'm telling you, I will answer. I promise you. I promise to whatever God or whoever anybody believes in. I promise you that I will answer your question if you answer mine.
If you really
Tell
want to
me.
get to it, if you really want to get to it, the answer is that you already violated their bodily autonomy by pushing them over the edge, and everything you do after that point is just the legal line between murder and attempted murder.
Right, and the equivalent part in the analogy for the abortion thing would be either sex and or becoming pregnant, the conception, but conception isn't an intentional act, and sex is done with the reasonable belief that it is not going to cause pregnancy. So like it just doesn't work. You would have to be saying that like the act of sex, if it results in pregnancy, would be the thing that's wrong here.
Murder.
But obviously
If,
he
like,
doesn't
if you
believe
really
that.
want to get to it, you already engaged in the violation.
Okay, so the thing that makes it so the thing that makes it not bodily autonomy in your mind is because you force that person into that state of dependency, right?
No, it's not because you force that person into a state of dependency. Oh my god. Okay.
No, it's not actually. The fact that they're dependent on you is not the problem. The problem is that you push them over the edge of a cliff, that you put them in a position they will die, they are likely to die. But that is not what happens in the course of conception.
Them to be there, right? Did you force them to be?
It's not
you
that-
saying it's because you did that. So in this
The
exact
initial
example,
act was a crime. Having sex isn't a crime.
Oh my God, Vosh. So hold on. So you're saying that if I removed this, if I said that I didn't push you over this edge or whatever, and then you did that of your own free will, and we had this agreement, and I just hanged you over there, then that would be bodily autonomy?
Uh, like for you to let them go?
Sure.
Also, no. You engage in an informal contract at that point to not drop a person
Okay,
off the
what
edge.
if it's like damaging to me? It's hard for me to hold you up.
Like their arm is made of razor blades or something?
No, they're just heavy as shit. They weigh as much as I do. They're like 245 pounds.
And you're about to go over the edge? Then yeah, you would have
Sure.
a legal and moral right to drop them. Yeah, if they're gonna kill both of you, then
I'm
yeah.
And we
saying-
see
but I'm
that. That's the
based
thing we
off of
see in
bodily
movies
autonomy, right?
all the time,
Well,
and we understand
I
intuitively.
mean, based off a number of things.
It's like
Bodily autonomy,
synecdoche
correct?
for
I don't know if
that
that's a bodily
understanding.
autonomy issue or if that's more of like
okay.
utilitarian calculus issue.
This is where I would draw the distinction between bodily autonomy and either just autonomy itself or like action autonomy might be the way I'd put it.
I feel like you just don't understand what bodily autonomy
No, I'm
is.
pretty
or
sure.
you are-
Wait, can I ask you my question? Wait, if I have a gun, you know those guns that have I don't know if they're called reverse triggers.
Okay, so this analogy is what I wanted to get to and why I didn't want to like end ahead of here because like this is actually really interesting if you disagree with me that there's a distinction between like action autonomy and bodily autonomy. If you think that those are not the same thing, that those are not different things, and that like bodily autonomy encapsulates both of them, this analogy ends up being really interesting and like actually um, pretty compelling. That said, I'm probably going to end after this because they go off about it for quite a while in the way they just did, where it's kind of a shit show and like I don't want to get through all of it. It's so long and it just gets worse.
But the gun only fires when the trigger gets pulled back out. Like
So yeah, to
I don't know if
recap,
they're called reverse.
basically like imagine you had a gun where instead of on the trigger being depressed that the bullet is fired, it when you pull the trigger, all that happens is the mechanism is primed, and when you release it is when the bullet is fired. Um, that's what we're talking about.
But the gun only fires when the trigger gets pulled back out. Like depressing it only primes the mechanism, and then you let go of the trigger and it fires. You know what I mean? So if I point that gun at you and I pull the trigger and then I point the gun at you, and then at this point you are now relying, dead man switch, you are now relying on my bodily autonomy
I'm
because
not
I have to
relying on your
continue to
bodily
depress
autonomy.
this trigger. So like, would it be a bodily autonomy issue? It's just murder. It's just murder
You're
with
not
extra
you're not
steps.
relying on that's not what bodily autonomy is.
Wait, how
Josh.
is that not bodily autonomy?
So now they're gonna get back into like what the hell is bodily autonomy. I'm off it. We've gotten to the interesting stuff. The problem of ending it here, unfortunately, but I don't remember where in this series, like in the remaining almost hour, I guess 45 minutes, like the things really go off the rails. I was actually kind of surprised. This rewatch made me think that Vosh did better debating than he had done previously. Maybe I'll just encourage y'all to watch the rest of it because it'll take like another hour and a half for us to watch the rest of it, and I just don't want to go that long. Maybe you can watch the rest of it where I think actually Vosh does kind of a poor job of arguing his position, and I think Tyler does a better job. But that said, maybe I would change my mind on a rewatch because I did think Vosh was doing better than I remembered. But that's why I thought this was really interesting. I hope y'all got a lot out of this and found it valuable. It ends up being kind of a shit show. If you want, like, you can watch the rest of this on your own. I'm kind of done with it, and I mostly just wanted to like talk about the interesting stuff on the subject. We do get some really interesting examples. Just the things I'll bring up that I know happened past here. Oh, we have the most replayed part. Maybe we'll watch the most replayed. All right, let's just jump there. What's up?
But anyway, so you're like, look, if a change in diet could decrease miscarriage by 20 or 30%, is it murder or negligible homicide at least if you don't eat a certain way? Do you stand by that question, right?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question.
Agreed. Agreed. I absolutely believe that is an interesting question. So my answer to you, I don't know if any pro-lifers actually answered you, so I'm just going to answer you. So I would say no, because I mean you have most studies, or at least most studies, will conclude that by eating like ultra processed foods like cereals, processed meats, or fucking biscuits, that you drastically increase your chances of cancer.
So I don't see how he could possibly reject this because remember he didn't care about percent likelihood before. He was even saying with that button thing like it wouldn't matter what the likelihood is when you press the button that a person dies. It's more than 0, so it's wrong to press it. This is the same thing. It's more than like there is a chance that like you'll have a miscarriage if you if you don't have a particular diet. So wouldn't it be wrong to not eat that way? He has to, like, remember, he doesn't care about bodily autonomy. He has to agree to this, but he understands how wrong it would be. So he's just gonna so he's coming up with the reasons why not. Yeah, like how messed up it would be. And this would be a good example for like why the imposition on bodily autonomy is a bad precedent. That even Tyler is seeming to acknowledge, but like not going to contend with.
It's like letting your kid eat like fucking Captain Crunch should be considered a crime, right? I find that to be just completely impractical. You're not.
He calls it impractical, but remember, like, so is outlawing abortion. Like, that hasn't mattered yet. Why does it matter now?
Give your kid the most nutritious meal possible.
What if a fetus dies because of like really poor health habits on the part of the mother?
Yeah. What if? Well, what kind of health choices? By what she's eating?
What they're eating, like maybe
you could even say like, what if they like smoke cigarettes while they're pregnant or whatever, I would take issue with that. I don't know.
If they're not getting enough nutrients because they're bulimic or anorexic, in which case the fetus could be starved out, malnutrition. It could be that they're not eating anything with like nutrients in it. It could be they use drugs. There are a lot of things.
This is part of the difficulty. Is like there's like seems to be continuum here where like clearly if a pregnant person was drinking alcohol and caffeine and smoking cigarettes and like doing all these things like that, like I think is I don't know if it is illegal, but like we can say that's pretty wrong, right? Like you're harming this child, maybe because there's the expectation that it will be born, that it becomes an issue. But like so like clearly that would be an issue, but requiring that their diet be like exactly like this very specific thing, otherwise you're risking a 1% chance of your child of like having a miscarriage or whatever. Like that seems too extreme. Like somewhere in there, it reminds me of Aristotle and his golden mean. As I was taught, it was somewhere between the excesses of, but somewhere between the extremes of excess and defect lies the golden mean of like somewhere in there is the right, but like where it is so hard to find.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're using drugs, absolutely. But if you're talking about what you are eating, so I'm specifically talking about like what you are eating. So like,
yeah, he says that, but like, okay, so what if a mother ate like a lot of fish, which is known to have mercury, or drinks coffee, which has caffeine? Like, would you have issues with that? Like, probably. But so clearly, it's not just the diet thing. You know, where this line is very hazy.
What you're eating,
I don't know if it just really
again,
improves
what you're
anything
eating
because
goes
of how
into
hazy it
like
is.
the child like feeds off of those nutrients, right?
I would believe so.
Yeah, I mean, we're not fucking scientists, but I mean, it sounds right?
Yeah, I imagine so. I don't know how directly the diet of the mother affects the fetus.
But for you and I, who aren't fucking medical experts, I mean, that fucking makes sense, right? That what you're eating, like the child then feeds off of those nutrients in the womb.
Yeah, I don't know what else they'd be getting.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, so it's the same thing, like if they were outside of the womb, like again, you are not, I don't believe that you have that responsibility, definitely at least not a legal responsibility that you should have to give your kid. It's like you're not forced to give your kid like a fucking vegan diet or some crazy diet that would definitely give them the best chance, because there's always going to be another food also that is going to increase or decrease the chances of this. So like if you eat this, I think I came across one study.
But like if you're comfortable saying that you have the right to your diet irrespective of the effect it could have on your fetus, then like you're clearly acknowledging that like your right to do with your body what you will supersedes the right of the fetus to impose upon that, which is exactly what we're talking about with abortion. I don't think he says that though.
I think Harvard cited it actually. I came across one study that showed that there were for each I think it's 10%, for every 10% that you an increase in your like ultra processed foods, which they agree to be like cereals, processed meats, biscuits, shit like that, that there was like a 12% increase in the chance of like fucking cancer, like actual cancer. You know what I mean? For every 10% increase that you consumed these specific types of foods, right? So then you would also have to say, it's like, okay, so if you fed your kid or allowed your kid at least to eat, Cap'n Crunch, which is fucking incredible, by the way, go to cereals. So if you allow your kid to eat like Cap'n Crunch or whatever, then if your kid dies,
so you're essentially your argument is that you couldn't.
It's like.
Your argument is that you couldn't hold the mother responsible because you wouldn't want to criminalize them for eating things that they would otherwise be expected to have the kid eat. But if they did things that the kid couldn't do. Okay, I don't know if that's necessarily a good argument.
Is that fair?
Well, it's definitely a cohesive argument. I'd have to think about it because I haven't heard that counter argument.
Okay, we watched the most replay part. I don't know why that's the most replayed part. The thing I was looking for was later on. This guy is like, you. I think it was this guy. Maybe it was someone else. I could have sworn it was like, you couldn't. You couldn't get an abortion for rape unless you could demonstrate in a court of law that that you were raped and that this person did the raping, which is insane. And like this is again where like no pro-choice anti-abortion people are like very much not in favor of the choice and like and have these exceptions and and care about what's practical. Clearly they don't. I couldn't really find it. I encourage you to watch the rest of it. I'm not watching it. We've already gone at this for quite a while, in addition to the like half hour of me just explaining my views, leaving out so much of what goes on in the subject. I hope this was really interesting to everybody. I'm not really sure what I'll do for the rest of the week. I had like some stuff planned. I am kind of finding, and I guess let me know, chat, comments, whatever. Just I was thinking maybe I'll like dial back how much I stream. From what it seems like, most people don't stream every day like this. It's kind of a lot, and I don't really have that much like on the docket. When I have it, like if I get to more substantial a more substantial audience and like where like I can have people on and just have conversations with people, which I'd really like to, or like do debates or myself or whatever, then I can stream more frequently because that will take a lot of time. But as of right now, most of this is like I have to come up with stuff to like present to like do on stream for kind of a while every day. Maybe like that's a problem in itself. I don't know. I'm just kind of musing to myself. And well, if you have any thoughts on it, please just let me know. But otherwise, I think I think what we went over today was pretty interesting. A lot of problems from both of them as far as I'll have this line up here. Does that look better? Looks a little bit better. I don't know. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Have a good one. Bye.